Dragons. You can't help loving them, and you can't help crapping your pants a little bit when coming face to face with them, because as beautiful as they are, they're also downright terrifying. For 5,000 years, the Valyrian freehold ruled the continent of Essos with fire and blood, and dragons were their first weapons. When the Valyrians died with the Doom, their legacy endured with the Targaryens, who forged the Seven Kingdoms into one and established the first High Dynasty of Westeros. Targaryen rule saw a continuation of the Valyrian tactic of absolutely annihilating every enemy with dragon flame, or at least it did for the first century and a half. Fire and Blood, George R.R. Martin's pseudo-history of the Targaryen dynasty, covers the first half of their rule, and in it are mentioned 30 dragons that changed the course of history with their actions. In this video, we'll take a look at all of them, even the obscure ones from a world of ice and fire, and give you a comprehensive list of every dragon named by George R.R. Martin. So, without further ado, put on your spoiler guards and pull them down tight over your eyes, because this ride is going to go straight through the 14 flames. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Balerion, the Black Dread. In the current timeline of A Song of Ice and Fire, whenever you mentioned a dragon to any person in the world, the image of a terrifying black beast pops up in their minds. Balerion, the Black Dread, born during the twilight of the Freehold, was the largest and oldest of the Targaryen dragons. Named after an ancient Valyrian god, Balerion had scales as black as coal, eyes like molten lava, and wings that could block out the sun when unfurled. He was a living embodiment of fire and death, capable of laying waste to armies and cities alike with his fearsome flame. Balerion was hatched in Valyria before the Doom and was brought to Dragonstone with 4 other dragons when House Targaryen fled the impending catastrophe. Soon after their arrival at Dragonstone, the 4 dragons that came with him died, making Balerion the only creature to have seen the Freehold in its glory. According to recent reports, young Balerion's first rider was the woman who prophesied the Doom, Daenys the Dreamer. Over the course of the Century of Blood, he'd become a fixture of Targaryen power in the Narrow Sea, but he was kept out of conflict by the Dragon Lords. That changed when Aegon Targaryen succeeded his father as Lord of Dragonstone and turned his eye westward, looking to conquer the 7 kingdoms. As the mightiest of the Targaryen dragons, Balerion played a pivotal role in Aegon's conquest of Westeros. The Lord of Dragonstone rode Balerion east first on a bit of a test run, when he helped Pentos repel a Volantine fleet trying to capture Lys. Once Balerion had warmed up his fires, he set out to conquer the 7 kingdoms with Aegon. Landing at the mouth of the Blackwater Rush with a handful of vassals and an army of a few hundred men, Aegon began his invasion, and Balerion was put to use almost immediately. After Aegon's sister wives Visenya and Rhaenys ensured the bloodless surrender of nearby Stokeworth and Rosby, Aegon met the combined forces of Lords Darklyn and Mootton in his first test. Balerion burnt the enemy forces while Aegon's armies killed the 2 lords, and following that defeat, a dozen local lords and their castles yielded to Targaryen suzerainty. Aegon was crowned for the first time, and as a newly made king, his first decree was to invade the Riverlands and capture Harrenhal. Aegon wanted his conquest to be as peaceful as possible, and so he offered King Harrenhal amnesty if he bent the knee. Harren refused, and Aegon brought fire and blood to his whole family with Balerion the Black Dread. His flame was responsible for the destruction of Harrenhal, melting its 5 gargantuan towers, extinguishing the Hall line, and turning the formidable castle into a smoking ruin. This act alone immortalized Balerion in the annals of Westerosi history, showcasing the destructive power of dragons. Aegon achieved numerous victories with his mount after this one, most notably the Field of Fire. During this battle, Balerion, along with Vagar and Meraxes, unleashed a devastating inferno that decimated the combined forces of the Reach and the Rock, bringing House Lannister and House Tyrell into the fold. After the submission of the North and the Vale, the Dragon King was coroneted a second time at Oldtown and turned Balerion's flames toward the Sands of Dawn. The Black Dread became a staple in the domains of House Martell during the 9-year period known as the First Dornish War. Despite him burning every castle in Dorne at least once over, this was one conquest Balerion couldn't win with his flames, so Aegon relented and signed a peace treaty with the Martells. For the rest of his reign, Balerion was his blue chip insurance in case any of his new lords had ideas of rebelling. For 24 years, Aegon and Balerion maintained the king's peace by traveling all over the 7 kingdoms during royal progresses. The king's presences regaled the small folk, while Balerion reminded their overlords of the oaths they'd sworn. After Aegon's death, Balerion was claimed by his son, Maegor the Cruel. Under Maegor, Balerion's destructive power was once again unleashed upon Westeros, only this time it was to deal with internal conflict. When Maegor faced rebellion and dissent, he rode Balerion to crush his enemies. especially during his notorious war against the Faith Militant, where Balerion's fire turned many a battlefield into charred ruin. Maegor used Balerion to enforce his rule, relying on the dragon's sheer might to maintain his iron grip on the realm. He killed his nephew Aegon and his dragon Quicksilver with Balerion in the battle beneath the God's Eye to secure his throne. He burned half a dozen castles in the Westerlands to bring houses more faithful and loyal to heel. Maegor's use of the Black Dread's flames reminded Westeros why Aegon turned Harrenhal into a blasted ruin in the first place, and by the end of his reign, no one wanted to mess with Balerion. Following Maegor's death, Balerion remained unclaimed for several years until Princess Aeria Targaryen, a young girl, attempted to bond with him in 54 AC. By this time, Balerion was older than Targaryen ownership of Dragonstone, and when Aeria claimed him, he decided their destination for her. She fled Dragonstone from her controlling mother on Balerion's back, only to return in a dire condition nearly 2 years later. The mysterious and horrifying nature of her affliction upon her return remains one of the most chilling tales associated with Balerion, as do the wounds that he returns with. The Black Dread had faced quarrels and scorpions, burnt armies and melted castles, killed a dragon and reduced fleets to ash, but never had he sported a 9-foot jagged rent on his body, smoking and leaking blood. The exact details of what transpired during their flight remain shrouded in mystery, but Septon Barth speculated that Balerion had ventured to Valyria, a place of dark magic and ancient curses, and where he was born. Only in Valyria could there be a creature that could harm Balerion, so, if you ask us, Barth was right. After his flight with Aeria, Balerion became lazy and incapable of fighting, so he was made a permanent resident of the Dragon Pit by King Jaehaerys. Where he was once known as the fearsome Black Dread, he started letting Targaryen princes get away with smacking him on the snout soon enough, like Balon the Brave. In the twilight of his years, Balerion was claimed by King Viserys Targaryen. By this time, the great dragon had stopped growing and was old and far less formidable than in his prime. King Viserys rode him only once, circling King's Landing 3 times before landing back at the Dragon Pit. He'd later admit that he meant to fly to Dragonstone, but he felt as though Balerion was too weak for the journey. The Conqueror's dragon spent its last days in the Dragon Pit, where he eventually died of old age. His skull, larger than that of any dragon before or since, was displayed in the Red Keep as a testament to his fearsome legacy. Balerion's life was one of unparalleled might and terror, from his hatching in Valyria to his death in the Dragon Pit. Balerion's mere presence served as a deterrent to rebellion and dissent, with Harrenhal becoming a part of his enduring legacy. He was the symbol of Targaryen supremacy, a creature of legend whose presence alone changed the course of history. While each of his riders left an indelible mark on the world of ice and fire, it can be argued that none did so more than the Black Dread. And if you don't agree with that, then let's just say there's a reason Daenerys' Drogon is called Balerion. Come again.
Rode Margaerys, whose jaws were big enough to swallow a horse whole.
Margaerys. Margaerys was one of the most significant dragons in the history of Westeros, because she proved that while dragons were incredible, they weren't infallible. Margaerys hatched on Dragonstone during the early years of House Targaryen's presence on the island, decades before Aegon's conquest. She was named after a god of the Valyrian freehold, and was one of the 3 dragons that Aegon the Conqueror and his sisters used to unite the 7 kingdoms. Margaerys was known for her silver scales, her golden eyes, and her immense size, for she was allegedly capable of swallowing a horse whole. She was claimed by Queen Rhaenys Targaryen shortly before she married her brother, and clocked in more flight time with her rider than Balerion and Vagar combined. For Rhaenys loved to fly. Rhaenys was known for her playful and adventurous spirit, as well as her love of flying. Her bond with Margaerys was strong, and she once said that she meant to fly her dragon west of the Sunset Sea to see the wonders that lay beyond. We'd have loved to read about their exploits, but sadly that wasn't going to happen anytime soon, because the love of her life had a war to fight. During Aegon's conquest, Margaerys became the first dragon deployed for the purpose of war, as Rhaenys flew her to Castle Rosby to secure the bloodless surrender of House Rosby. Visenya secured Stokeworth, and when Aegon smashed the armies of House Darklyn and House Mouton, the Targaryens officially gained enough territory to declare themselves monarchs. Rhaenys became a queen in more than just name, and after Aegon was crowned the first time around, she went to war in earnest. The first significant battle involving Margaerys was the Last Storm. In the Stormlands, Rhaenys and Margaerys confronted Argilac the Arrogant, the last Storm King. Argilac's arrogance had sparked Aegon's conquest after a fashion, but when he heard what happened to Harrenhal, he decided his life wouldn't end at Storm's End. Argilac refused to surrender or submit, called his banners and prepared to meet the Targaryens in the field. His vassals, the Lords Buckler, Errol, and Fell, ambushed Rhaenys' army, being led by her alleged bastard brother, Orys Baratheon, and the Targaryens lost many soldiers that dreadful day near the Wendwater. Queen Rhaenys responded by burning the Kingswood with Meraxes' dragon flame and pressing on towards Storm's End, scouting for Argilac's men from the skies. The Targaryen army reached as far into the heart of the Stormlands as Bronzegate, where they formed up in a defensive position and awaited Argilac the Arrogant's armies. When the Storm King arrived with a host twice as big as the dragons, a massive storm broke out, and a fierce battle followed in which Margaerys became a nuclear advantage. Though she couldn't fly because of the heavy downpour, she could fight with teeth and claw and tail, and her fires would still burn hot. Margaerys' dragonfire decimated the Stormlanders' vanguard, and in the confusion, Argilac was thrown from his saddle. He was killed in single combat by Orys Baratheon, and when Margaerys arrived at Storm's End, Argilac's rebellious daughter had no choice but to surrender to the Targaryens. With the Stormland secure, Rhaenys flew to Stony Sept to converge with her siblings, and together they marched towards the greatest battle of the conquest, the Field of Fire. Aegon the Conqueror and his sisters faced the combined forces of King Loren Lannister of the Rock and King Mern Gardner of the Reach, some 55,000 strong. The Targaryens deployed a fifth of that number in conventional troops, but also involved all three of their dragons in the battle, the only time that happens during the entire conquest. The dragons unleashed their fiery breath upon the enemy forces, resulting in the deaths of thousands of men and the annihilation of the opposing armies. The victory at the Field of Fire was destructive and decisive, leading to the submission of the Reach and the West, and subsequently the North and the Vale. While Margaerys played a huge role in all these battles, her most significant contributions were made toward the conquest of Dorne. After Torrhen Stark bent the knee, Aegon sent Rhaenys to do what Visenya did in the Vale and bring Dorne into the fold as peacefully as possible. Margaerys flew over the fortified Prince's Pass and crossed the castles of Vaith and Godsgrace on the Greenblood River, but found them both abandoned. When she reached the Planky Town, her eyes could only see old men, women, and children, no lords or people of fighting age or disposition. When she finally arrived at Sunspear, she was faced by the 80-year-old blind ruler of Dorne, Princess Meria Martell. Rhaenys demanded the surrender to her brother's authority, but Meria refused the proposal. She still remembered how the dragons had burnt her ancestors and her homeland, driven her people out of the Rhoyne, and forced them to settle in the desert land of Dorne. She warned Rhaenys to return at her peril and promised her that she would find no easy conquest here. Turns out she was right on both fronts. Rhaenys and Margaerys had a lot of technical success in their first official campaign in Dorne, seizing several castles and burning the Planky Town to ashes. They reached Sunspear with Aegon and Balerion and declared Dorne to be under the authority of the Iron Throne, but this conquest was utterly hollow. The First Dornish War saw the defenders orchestrate a lethal guerrilla warfare campaign, melting away from their settlements when Aegon and his dragons came, and recapturing them as soon as they left. Aegon left Jon Rosby in charge of the Red Sands as he made his way back to King's Landing following his first campaign, but as soon as he reached his city, Jon was defenestrated by Meria, and the Dornish escalated the situation. Aegon sent his dragons across the Red Mountains on 3 occasions, burning many Dornish castles in retaliation for their attacks on his realm, and it was the third wave that turned out to be the most tragic for him. In 10 AC, the Dornish executed a distraction campaign that severely weakened the economy of Westeros. Lord Fowler captured the border castle called Nightsong, and as the Reach and the Stormlands mobilized against him, Joffrey Dane burned all the lands surrounding Old Town, crippling their food production and slowing down progress by a few months at least. Aegon retaliated by burning their seats, Skyreach and Starfall, and sending Rhaenys and Margaerys to make an additional statement by attacking the castle of Hellholt. Perhaps House Ulla had played a major role in that Dornish sneak attack, which landed them on the dragon's radar. Or perhaps this was just Aegon's way of asserting his dominance over the Dornish while trying to force their hand. Either way, it was a bad call, because Rhaenys and Margaerys were left vulnerable, and that fact caught up with them. During the assault, a scorpion bolt fired from the Sole Tower of Hellholt struck Margaerys in the eye, killing the dragon instantly and causing her to crash into the castle. Had this scorpion bolt been aimed anywhere near her body, or even her face, the results might not have been similar. Dragon scales are harder than steel, and they keep getting harder with age, to the point they become near impervious to dragon flame and thrust damage. Their only weak spots on their bodies were their wing membranes and their eyes, and scoring the latter was a guaranteed victory, for then you'd also pierce the dragon's brain. Rhaenys was also killed in that fateful fall, marking the end of Margaerys' life and her riders. The death of Margaerys had far-reaching consequences. Aegon and Visenya Targaryen responded with a campaign of brutal retribution known as the Dragon's Wrath. Balerion and Vagar were unleashed upon Dorne, burning castles and towns in a bid to force the Dornish into submission. Despite the devastation, the Dornish continued to resist, and the war ultimately ended in a stalemate. The death of Margaerys and Rhaenys was a significant blow to the Targaryens, and demonstrated the vulnerability of even the most powerful dragons. It served as a reminder of the constant dangers faced by dragon riders and the high cost of war. The bones of Margaerys were left at Hellholt, a reminder that even creatures akin to God can be brought down by men. Her skull was later displayed in the Red Keep, alongside those of other notable dragons, as a reminder of the Targaryens' might and the sacrifices made during their conquest of Westeros. Margaerys' legacy as a symbol of Targaryen power and the high cost of war endured long after her death. Vagar. The only Targaryen dragon that ever caught up to Balerion's size and reputation for destruction was Vagar. She was hatched on Dragonstone in 52 AC during the Century of Blood and was named after one of the gods of Old Valyria. She was the second dragon born to the Targaryens on Dragonstone, and she quickly became known for her size, strength, ferocity, and gorgeous bronze coloring with just a hint of oxidized green. Vagar's first recorded rider was Queen Visenya Targaryen, the elder sister-wife of Aegon the Conqueror. She played a crucial role in the Targaryen conquest of Westeros, alongside the dragon of Aegon and Visenya's other sibling, Rhaenys. Vagar's fearsome presence in battle helped secure key victories, starting with the submission of Stokeworth. While Aegon was off burning Harrenhal and Rhaenys was off burning the Stormlords, Visenya flew Vagar with Aegon's fleet to invade the Vale of Arryn. The Targaryen ships were destroyed by the Arryn fleet, but Vagar burned the Arryn fleet in response, leaving her target Gulltown without protection or power at sea. It was a stalemate, but Visenya made up for it by securing the submission of Cracklaw Point, a first in the region's history. Vagar was included in the decisive Battle of the Field of Fire, where she, along with Aegon's dragon Balerion and Rhaenys' dragon Meraxes, burned the combined forces of the Reach and the Westerlands, causing thousands of deaths and 1,000 more injuries by fire. This victory cemented Targaryen dominance and led to the submission of many great houses, like the Lannisters and Tyrells. Vagar helped Aegon secure the submission of the North, and then the Vale, and she went mostly solo on that mission. Queen Visenya flew over the Mountains of the Moon and landed her in the Eyrie's inner courtyard, where she found the young King Ronal Arryn and used him to strike a deal with his mother. In exchange for the king getting to ride Vagar, Shadow would bend the knee, and to protect the future of her son and her family, the queen accepted these terms. Vagar flew Ronal thrice around the giant's lance, and where he'd risen with her as a king, he got off her as a lord and a warden. After Aegon was coroneted for the second time, his first act as king was to send Visenya and Vagar to suppress the Sistermen rebellion, which they managed to do without bloodshed. Following that, the dragon and the dragon queen remained fixtures of King's Landing, while Aegon and Rhaenys were off fighting the First Dornish War. Vagar's services weren't needed at first, but when Rhaenys died, Aegon and Visenya were so grief-stricken that they decided to take it out on their enemies. Like Balerion, she too burnt all Dornish castles, save Sunspear, at least once over, and the period of time where the dragons kept attacking seat after seat over and over came to be known as the Dragon's Wrath. Once Aegon signed a peace treaty with Dorne, which Visenya was dead set against, there was nothing more to be done for Vagar except flying her rider to where she needed to be. The remainder of Aegon's reign was rather uneventful for Vagar, but business picked up when he died. Aegon's named heir, Aenys, had a disastrous 5-year reign that saw half a dozen rebellions break out in the realm, with one of them outliving him. When Aenys died, Visenya flew Vagar to Pentos and brought her own son Maegor back from exile, helping him usurp the Iron Throne. When Vagar and Balerion returned to a faith-occupied King's Landing, riots broke out, and the two dragons' presence ensured Maegor ruled the city with an iron fist. After consolidating his power and overseeing the construction of the Red Keep for half a year, Maegor's mother Visenya flew out from King's Landing to remind the pious lords of Westeros of the Dragon's Wrath. Vagar burnt the castles of House Lynchester, Deddings, Terrick, Wayne, and Blaintree, while Maegor attacked faith-aligned houses in the Westerlands with Balerion. Mother and son then flew their dragons to Old Town, where they brought the faith to heel and presided over half a year of trials and executions. This was Vagar's last military outing with his first rider, Visenya Targaryen. She died a year later, and after Visenya's death, Vagar was riderless for 29 years until Prince Balon Targaryen, son of King Jaehaerys, claimed her. With Balon, Vagar continued to be a symbol of Targaryen power, contributing to the stability and security of the realm. As the largest active dragon in Westeros, Vagar's presence and might was a reminder of why House Targaryen's words were fire and blood. She'd grown much larger than she was during the conquest, and her fires were near as hot as Balerion's. Balon flew Vagar into two major conflicts, the Fourth Dornish War and the Myrish bloodbath. In the former, he burnt an invading Dornish fleet with his father, brother, and their dragons, stopping the war from even hitting the shores of Cape Wrath. In the latter, he burnt the ships of Myrish exiles that had invaded and annexed the island of Tarth, and killed any stragglers with Dark Sister, for they'd killed his beloved big brother. Balon Targaryen became heir to the throne after Aemon's death, and he was made the Hand of the King in 100 AC, putting Vagar back on track to becoming a King's Mount. However, Balon's untimely death in 101 AC once again left Vagar without a rider, and she'd never bond with a king in her entire life, at least from a technical standpoint. Vagar was next claimed by Lady Laena Velaryon, who was a formidable dragon rider in her own right, but preferred flying to fighting. Laena and Vagar's most notable engagement was their tour of Essos after her marriage to Daemon Targaryen. For as long as she was alive, Vagar was kept out of conflicts. Laena's death, however, once again left Vagar riderless, until she was claimed by her final rider in life, Prince Aemon Targaryen, the son of King Viserys. Aemon's bond with Vagar was one of the most significant and tumultuous in her history. As the mount of the impatient and ill-tempered one-eyed prince, her time with him reflected his brutish personality and combined the devastation of all her achievements in life up to that point into one giant ball of terror. Vagar's might and Aemon's ambition played a critical role in the Dance of the Dragons. They kicked off the civil war when they killed Cyrax and Lucerys in the dance over Shipbreaker Bay. She was instrumental in several key battles, including the Battle of Rook's Rest, where she and Aemon clashed with Rhaenys Targaryen and her dragon, Melly. With a little help from Sunfire, Vagar is able to kill both of them and help the Greens secure the Crownlands region for their own. Aemon could have potentially won the war for the Greens if he stuck to the plan and went after their armies instead of chasing his grudge match with Daemon. Alas, he was too ambitious and drunk on power to heed his Lord Commander's advice and chose to deal in death and terror rather than going to battle and showing discipline. Vagar became the terror of the Trident, burning a score of villages and 2 seats of power that we know of. Her campaign of destruction made the fertile plains of the Riverlands feel like the sands of dawn, after she and Balerion fused it to glass over Rhaenys' death. It took Daemon offering himself up as a challenge and spreading the word through the Riverlands to get Aemon to stop his vicious campaign. But by this time, Vagar had cemented herself as the terror of the Trident. 14 days after Daemon first announced that he was waiting for his nephew in Harrenhal, Aemon arrived. The two shared a brief exchange, before rising into the skies with their dragons, ready to do battle. This duel, fought over the God's Eye, was one of the most spectacular and devastating in the history of dragon riders. Vagar and Cyrax mauled and mutilated each other, slamming into one another like wild bulls and tearing each other's flesh apart like hyenas. Cyrax was smaller than Vagar, but younger, more mobile, and somehow more vicious. Once he grabbed onto her neck with his jaws, he didn't let go, even as Vagar spilled his entrails by ripping his entrails. The battle ended when Daemon Targaryen leapt from his saddle and drove Dark Sister through Aemon's empty eye, with both dragons and their riders perishing in the conflict. Vagar's death marked the end of an era. Her body, along with Cyrax and their riders, fell into the waters of the God's Eye, a lake that became their final resting place, until the Targaryens recovered their remains and added them to their morbid skull collection. Vagar's legacy lived beyond her own lifetime. As one of the oldest and largest dragons, and the only one that knew a pre-conquest world following Meraxes and Balerion's deaths, her presence in Westeros had a lasting impact on the Targaryen dynasty. Her role in major battles and her bond with some of the most influential figures in Targaryen history cemented her place as one of the greatest dragons ever to live, for better or for worse. From Aegon's conquest to the Dance of the Dragons, her actions were pivotal to establishing and maintaining Targaryen rule over the Seven Kingdoms. Her legacy as a fearsome and loyal dragon continues to be remembered as one of the most iconic in the annals of A Song of Ice and Fire. Cyrax, the first dragon of a queen claimant to the Iron Throne. Cyrax was the predecessor of Drogon, in that she was the first dragon to be ridden by a Targaryen seeking to become queen of Westeros. However, in all other matters, the two couldn't be more different. Cyrax hatched during the final years of King Jaehaerys' reign, although the exact date of her birth isn't specified. Cyrax was first claimed by Princess Rhaenyra Targaryen, the daughter of King Viserys Targaryen and his first wife, Queen Aemma Arryn, at the age of 7. We know that she was a young dragon when Rhaenyra claimed her, and in Fire and Blood, Rhaenyra turned 7 the year after Jaehaerys died. Cyrax was named by the princess after a Valyrian goddess and was known for her beautiful golden yellow scales. Her magnificence matched her riders, for Rhaenyra, known as the Realm's Delight, was a fierce and determined princess of surpassing beauty. They shared a strong bond with each other, and throughout Rhaenyra's early life, Cyrax was a symbol of her status as the heir to the Iron Throne. She wasn't used for battle during this period, but Rhaenyra would often fly around Targaryen strongholds and take her wherever she went. Her presence was a constant reminder of the power power and majesty of House Targaryen, but dragons tend to take after their riders, and in that regard, Rhaenyra and Cyrax were one and the same. In the books, Rhaenyra was a pampered princess and a bit of a glutton. By the time the dance arrived, she had a bit of a girth, because all her needs were attended to at all times as the royal heir. Her dragon was treated much the same, kept in chains and exceedingly well fed, reflecting Rhaenyra's privileged position. In fact, Cyrax hadn't hunted for years at the outbreak of the dance, and the only time she'd burnt something that wasn't food was when she set Emma's funeral pyre alight. This already makes show Cyrax much better than her book counterpart. The only energy she was exerting was when Rhaenyra would go on her joyrides with Daemon and Laena, so while she grew large, she wasn't nearly as formidable as Cyrax. Cyrax from the show is smaller than even Seasmoke, who should have been born around the same time as her, probably because she spent a lot more time within the dragon pit. But her standoff against Adam's dragon and then Aemon showed us that at least she'll handle business when it comes down to that. Cyrax was one of the more docile dragons when the dance began, and that didn't really change throughout her life. The conflict was sparked by a succession crisis following the death of King Viserys Targaryen, with Rhaenyra Targaryen, Viserys' chosen heir, supported by the Blacks, Aegon Targaryen, Viserys' son by his second wife, supported by the Greens. One of the first significant actions involving Cyrax during the Civil War was Rhaenyra's coronation as Queen on Dragonstone. Cyrax was present during the ceremony, symbolizing Rhaenyra's legitimacy and strength. The dragon's presence was a powerful statement, reinforcing Rhaenyra's claim to the Iron Throne. Being the Queen's mount, Cyrax remained at Dragonstone for much of the first year of the war, and her only claim to fame up to that point was that she was the literal mother of dragons. Before the Dance of the Dragons, Cyrax laid several clutches of eggs, contributing to the Targaryen dragon population by adding Vermax, Arax, and Tyraxes to their ranks. Her last clutch is given to Rhaena Targaryen when she heads to the Vale, and the final healthy dragon to be born to House Targaryen hatches from one of its eggs. Cyrax became militarily relevant for the first time when she participated in the fall of King's Landing. Rhaenyra flew on Cyrax to the city with Daemon and Cyraxes, where they landed in the courtyard of the Red Keep as their forces seized the capital. Cyrax's arrival was a dramatic and intimidating display of power, contributing to the successful downfall of the city, landing a major blow on the morale of the Greens. The dragon was then chained in the outer ward of the Red Keep, where she remained for the rest of the war. Perhaps Rhaenyra should have given her mount more breathing space than she did, because keeping Cyrax chained led to one of the final tragedies of her life. During the Black Queen's occupation of King's Landing, Sir Byron Swan, whose family was sworn to the Greens, tried to kill Cyrax by copying the legendary Serwyn of the Mirror Shield. He crept up on her from behind with a mirrored shield that he'd hoped would scare the dragon away. Instead, Cyrax cooked him. And no, we don't say that in the modern sensibility of the phrase. The last battle or any kind of offensive maneuver involving Cyrax was the storming of the Dragon Pit, which occurred in 130 AC. As tensions escalated in King's Landing due to Rhaenyra's supposedly tyrannical rule, a mob of angry small folk, incited by preachers and the shepherd, stormed the Dragon Pit, seeking to destroy the Targaryen dragons. Joffrey Velaryon, desperate to help his mother and prove his worth, attempted to ride Cyrax despite having a dragon of his own, but it was trapped in the pit. Joffrey mounted Cyrax and tried to fly her, but the dragon, unfamiliar with him as a rider, resisted and threw him off. Joffrey fell to his death, and Cyrax, now riderless, was left vulnerable. The mob eventually reached Cyrax, who fought fiercely to defend herself. Despite her strength and ferocity, Cyrax was overwhelmed by the sheer number of attackers. The mob managed to kill the dragon, making a tragic end to her life and the reign of dragons. The death of Cyrax was a significant blow to Rhaenyra and her supporters, who somehow both won and lost the war. The queen was killed shortly after her dragon's death, yet her allies won her war and seated her son Aegon on the Iron Throne. From her early days as a symbol of Rhaenyra's status to her participation in key events during the Civil War, Cyrax was a powerful and majestic dragon. Her death during the storming of the Dragon Pit underscored the brutal realities of the Targaryen conflict, which led to the eventual decline of dragonkind in Westeros. Cyrax's legacy lived on as a reminder of the glory and tragedy of the Targaryen dynasty, and her skull is presumably one of the 19 that future Targaryen kings hung on the walls of the Red Keep. Cyraxes. As you guys might know by now, Dragon Pit dragons never quite matched the size or viciousness of the dragons of old. Valyrion, Vagar, and Meraxes reached sizes and levels of violence that their successors simply couldn't match. Except, of course, for this one. If there's one thing that we can say about the life of Cyraxes, it's that it was the life of a true war dragon. His egg hatched sometime before 72 AC, and he was moved to the Dragon Pit soon after his birth. Cyraxes was considered one of the fiercest young dragons in the pit by its dragon keepers, and they nicknamed him the Bloodworm due to his ferocity and scarlet red scales. By 72 AC, he was large enough to be ridden, and Prince Aemon Targaryen, the eldest son of King Jaehaerys the Conciliator, claimed him as his mount. In later years, the prince would remark that his dragon does love to burn. Aemon, along with his siblings Alyssa and Valon, who rode Mellys and Vagar respectively, would often fly across the skies of King's Landing on Cyrax's back, bonding with his siblings while showcasing the power of Targaryen dragons. The Bloodworm got his first real taste of military engagement during the Fourth Dornish War in 83 AC. Aemon and Cyrax, along with Vermithor and Vagar, destroyed the Dornish fleet before it hit the shores of the Stormlands, achieving a decisive victory in a single day, and without any Targaryen casualties. This battle demonstrated Cyrax's lethal capabilities and established his reputation as a formidable dragon in warfare. In 92 AC, when rogue Meermen invaded the island of Tarth, Aemon and Cyrax flew to aid the defenders. Cyrax outdistanced the Velaryon fleet led by Lord Corlys Velaryon and deposited Aemon right in the middle of Lord Cameron Tarth's hidden mountain camp. However, his massive body was spotted by Meerish assassins, and Prince Aemon was killed by a crossbow bolt to the throat while Cyrax was off feeding on goats. By 105 AC, Prince Daemon Targaryen, Aemon's nephew, had claimed Cyrax as his mount. Daemon, known as the Rogue Prince, was a fierce warrior and a perfect match for the Bloodworm. They became a fearsome pair, participating in numerous battles and campaigns. One of their most notable campaigns was the War for the Stepstones, which lasted for a decade, beginning in 105 AC. Daemon sought to establish himself independent of his brother's authority as king of the Stepstones and the Narrow Sea. Cyrax played a crucial role in realizing this ambition, using his dragonfire to decimate enemy forces and secure victories. Daemon and Cyrax's presence in the Stepstones was a significant factor in the initial success of Daemon's campaign, and after 2 years of fighting, he had all but 2 of the islands under his control. He was declared king, but his grip on his kingdom became loose afterward, and Daemon abandoned the Stepstones entirely when he met his second wife. Still, the Stepstones gave Cyrax's prolonged exposure to land and naval warfare, which shaped him into the crafty and cunning dragon that he became in his older age. After Daemon remarried Lady Laena Velaryon, the couple toured the free cities of Essos with their dragons. Their presence drew huge crowds, showcasing the power and majesty of House Targaryen all over Essos. Laena unexpectedly died of a childbirth complication soon after they returned to Westeros, and Daemon wasted no time in marrying Rhaenyra. With this, the Blacks and the Greens became irreconcilable, and war became inevitable. At the start of the Dance of the Dragons, Cyrax was the largest and most experienced dragon on the Black side. Soon after Rhaenyra's coronation, Daemon and Cyrax landed atop Kingspire Tower in a solo assault on Harrenhal and seized the stronghold without resistance. This strategic move gave the Blacks a significant foothold in the Riverlands, which they expanded when Daemon and Cyrax forced House Bracken's surrender. In the show, things played out differently, and the Bloodworm remained at Harrenhal after his arrival, but the end result of Daemon's hallucination arc was the same. Once the Riverlords gathered under the Black Banner, Daemon sent them out to meet the Lannister army invading from the west, while he flew Cyrax east and south for the surprise capture of King's Landing. Once the capital was secure, Daemon and Cyrax remained in the Red Keep with Rhaenyra and Cyrax, while the Blacks consolidated their power. The pair flew out once again when reports of Aemon and Vagar terrorizing the Riverlands reached King's Landing, and the Bloodworm became a scout worm for a while. Using Maidenpool as his base, Daemon flew forth with Cyrax each day, but neither he nor his companion Nettles could find a trace of his vile nephew. In the end, he decided to use himself as bait, leading to a battle that marked the beginning of the end for dragons in Westeros. One of the most pivotal moments for Cyrax during the Dance of the Dragons was the battle above the God's Eye. After waiting for his nephew's arrival for close to a fortnight, Prince Daemon challenged Prince Aemon Targaryen to single combat when he finally showed up. The Rogue Prince was the rider of the Bloodworm, the general of 100 battles and 1,000 burnings. The One-Eyed Prince had Vagar, the largest and most powerful dragon in Westeros, albeit old and admittedly weary from his one-man terror campaign. The two dragons clashed in a fierce aerial battle above the God's Eye Lake, which was surprisingly equal. Despite being smaller, Cyrax fought valiantly against the larger Vagar, slamming into her repeatedly and chomping down on her neck in lethal fashion. We imagine his snake-like neck coiled itself around hers as he choked her out. During the battle, Daemon leapt from Cyrax onto Vagar and killed Aemon by driving his sword Dark Sister through Aemon's eye. The dragons, locked in combat, plummeted into the lake below. The impact of the fall was catastrophic. Vagar died from the force of the fall, and though Cyrax managed to crawl to the shore, he soon succumbed to his injuries. His entrails were falling out, and one of his wing arms had been torn off by Aemon's dragon. Cyrax died in front of the walls of Harrenhal, marking the end of a legendary dragon. Cyrax's life was marked by significant achievements and battle. As the mount of two prominent Targaryen princes, he played a crucial role in several key conflicts, including the Fourth Dornish War, the War for the Stepstones, and the Dance of the Dragons. His ferocity and power earned him the nickname Bloodworm, made him a legendary figure in the history of Westeros, and his skull being displayed in the Red Keep's throne room is proof of that. Mellys. You know dragons and their riders share fates, because both of Melly's riders can be slapped with the label of being the queen who never was. Mellys hatched during the early years of King Jaehaerys' rule, although the exact date of her birth isn't specified. She was known for her striking appearance, with scarlet scales, pink wing membranes, and crest, horns, and claws bright as copper. Mellys was also known for her speed, being one of the fastest dragons in the Dragon Pit, able to outpace both Cyrax and Vagar, and these qualities earned her the nickname the Red Queen. Mellys was first claimed by Prince Alyssa Targaryen, the first daughter of King Jaehaerys and Queen Alysanne to live into adulthood. Alyssa was a brave and adventurous princess, more man than woman, as she loved to ride and climb and fight with wooden swords. Her bond with Mellys was strong, and when Alyssa claimed her after her marriage to Valon, she claimed that they were both red maidens who had been mounted. Together, they flew across Blackwater Bay each hour Alyssa wasn't with her husband. Mellys would frequently be joined by Vagar and Cyrax as well as their riders during these flights, showcasing the power and majesty of the Targaryens, especially under the reign of the Conciliator. Though she never flew him to war, Alyssa had a ritual of her own with her dragon. When her first son Viserys was born, she strapped him to a chest at 9 days old and took him for a ride on Mellys. She repeated this with her second son Daemon when he was a fortnight old. Her maesters and ladies and everyone with a thimble of sense advised her against it, but Alyssa was to be Balon's dragon princess, and she made choices of her own volition. Alyssa's time with Mellys was cut short when she died shortly after giving birth to her third son, Prince Aegon, in 84 AC. Had she survived that childbirth and lived a decade longer, she'd have become the wife of the heir to the Iron Throne, putting her on the path to becoming Queen of the Seven Kingdoms. That's how she's a queen who never was. But where Alyssa's royal future with Mellys was mostly speculative, her next rider wasn't. After Alyssa's death, Mellys remained riderless for 3 years, until she was claimed by Princess Rhaenys Targaryen. Rhaenys, the daughter of Prince Aemon Targaryen and Lady Jocelyn Baratheon, was King Jaehaerys' firstborn granddaughter. Since Aemon and Jocelyn had no children other than Rhaenys, she was her father's heir, and because he was the Prince of Dragonstone, Rhaenys had a claim to the Iron Throne as well. Queen Alysanne would often insist that she should be named Jaehaerys' heir after Aemon's death, but he chose Valon instead. And that, plus the Great Council of 101 AC, is why she's known as the Queen who never was. But no matter what her succession status, Rhaenys was a formidable dragon rider and a key figure in the history of the Targaryen dynasty. Her bond with Mellys was strong, and she would fly him often. Rhaenys and Mellys joined Jaehaerys on his final progress through the Reach, and when she got married to Corlys Velaryon, the Queen who never was arrived on Dragonback. Thanks to her familial relations with Rhaenyra Targaryen, being her mother-in-law as well as her aunt, Rhaenys and Mellys both played significant roles during the Dance of the Dragons on the side of the Blacks. At the outbreak of the Civil War, Rhaenys' husband Corlys blockaded the Gullet with the massive Velaryon fleet. Because the Velaryon fleet was also the royal fleet, this robbed the Greens of their power at sea and also cut off all supplies to King's Landing through ships. While the Sea Snake took care of the waters, Rhaenys took to the skies, patrolling the Gullet on the back of her Red Queen day and night. At this point, Mellys was quite old, easily 50 plus, so she'd gotten lazy. But when roused, she could still be fearsome and show to the world why she's called the Red Queen. In the show, they had her start the destruction of the Dragon Pit 3 seasons too early to pull off a badass moment with Rhaenys, but the impact that Mellys has on the structure and the people within it is not an exaggeration. The Red Queen could have ended the war that day, and alas, she'd lived to regret that. The first and tragically only battle involving Mellys during the dance was the battle at Rook's Rest. The Greens, led by Criston the Kingmaker, had laid siege to Rook's Rest, the stronghold of House Staunton. Rhaenys arrived on Mellys 9 days after he sent for backup to break the siege and deal with Cole. The battle was fierce, with Mellys initially gaining the upper hand. However, that changed when Criston sprung his trap and King Aegon and Prince Aemond arrived on their dragons. The combined might of Sunfire and Vagar proved overwhelming for the Red Queen. Mellys fought valiantly, tearing off one of Sunfire's wings and giving him lethal injuries, but she was ultimately no match for Vagar. The show illustrated this point further by having Sunfire fight Mellys first, get utterly outclassed, and then repeating the same with the Red Queen. Only Vagar subbed in for her. To be honest with you guys, we prefer the TV version of the battle at Rook's Rest, because that dragon fight was absolutely stunning. No matter what Mellys tried, she couldn't get through Vagar's thick skin, and ultimately she was killed in the battle. Rhaenys perished alongside her dragon, and in the books, her fate was worse than crashing from hundreds of feet in the sky. This battle was a significant early victory for the Greens, but it came at a high cost, with Aegon and Sunfire suffering severe injuries. Melly's death at Rook's Rest was devastating for the Blacks, as Rhaenys was one of Rhaenyra's most loyal supporters, and Melly's loss weakened her position in the war. Despite her relatively short involvement in the dance, Melly's impact on the conflict was profound. Her participation in the battle at Rook's Rest demonstrated her ferocity and strength, and her death marked a turning point in the Civil War. When the Kingmaker paraded her skull through the streets of King's Landing, everyone realized that all bets were off, and the Seven Kingdoms truly gave themselves over to fire and blood. Melly's legacy as the Red Queen lived on in the annals of Westerosi history. Her striking appearance and formidable presence made her one of the most memorable dragons of her time. The bond she shared with her riders, Princess Alyssa and Princess Rhaenys, highlighted the deep connection between the Targaryens and their dragons. Melly's life and death were emblematic of the power and tragedy of the Targaryen dynasty, showcasing the glory and devastation the dragons could bring to the family and the realm.
Forward, Sunfire!
Sunfire. Sunfire, often referred to as Sunfire the Golden, was one of the most magnificent dragons in the history of Westeros, and if an Archmaester of the Citadel can write that, despite their alleged anti-dragon bias, well, you know it must be true. Sunfire hatched during the early years of King Viserys' reign, although like most other dragons, the exact date of his birth isn't specified. He was known for his remarkable size and exceptional beauty, with golden scales that shone in the sunlight and wings that were a blend of gold and pink. Sunfire's rider, Prince Aegon Targaryen, was the eldest son of Viserys and Queen Alicent Hightower, and the prince's birth itself was the catalyst of the Targaryen Civil War. Aegon claimed Sunfire as his mount well before his 14th name day, and though the prince was a drunken lecher, his dragon was his only pride and passion. With each passing year, Sunfire grew larger, heavier, and more formidable, and by the time the Dance of the Dragons began, he was old enough to go to war. Though Sunfire was a budding war dragon, the inexperience of his rider, especially in the art of dragon warfare, sealed his fate from day one. The first significant battle of his life was the battle at Rook's Rest, and Sunfire's golden career nearly ended before it even took off. This battle saw Sunfire, alongside Vagar, face off against Princess Rhaenys Targaryen and her dragon, Melly. The Greens had laid siege to Rook's Rest, and Rhaenys arrived to break the siege. After she made some headway, Criston Cole sprung his trap and had the prince and the king attack the Red Queen. The battle was fierce, with Melly initially gaining the upper hand, biting off half of Sunfire's wing and locking her jaws firmly around his throat. She would have probably killed Aegon and ended the war before it got any worse. However, the combined might of Sunfire and Vagar proved overwhelming. Melly was killed, and Rhaenys perished in the battle. Despite the victory, Sunfire was also severely injured, and Aegon's state was worse, having suffered severe burns and broken bones, leaving him incapacitated for a very long time. Now, in the show, things play out a little differently. Cole's trap only included Aemond and Vagar, and Aegon only joined them because he was drunk and Sunfire was a loyal little goofball. The king foolishly attacked Melly, nearly got his dragon killed, and was nearly killed himself by his brother, who thought himself so much better than him. The last we saw Sunfire, he was suffering from severe burns, missing several chunks of flesh, and most importantly, presumed dead by the Blacks. This is just as well, because everything he does from this point onward proves to be a nightmare for them. Because of his size and the scope of his injuries, Cole left Sunfire at Rook's Rest with a set of guards so he could recover. His rest was cut short when Blacks, being led by Lord Mooten, retook the castle and tried to end him once and for all. Dragons can fight with their tails in flames just as well on ground as they can mid-air, and Sunfire killed 60 soldiers before disappearing from Rook's Rest altogether. The crabs and bruins of Cracklaw Point argue that he took shelter in their bogs and amongst their pines. And this might just be true, because Sunfire's wing wasn't healed. If it had been, he'd have taken flight when Lord Mooten attacked, so he must have spent at least some amount of time at Cracklaw Point, considering it borders Rook's Rest. After this, Sunfire disappeared for a while and was only rediscovered thanks to sailors from the ship Nessaria, who observed 2 dragons fighting near the vents of the Dragon Mont, one with golden scales. The battle was brutal, and Sunfire sustained further injuries, but despite his weakened state, Sunfire managed to kill the dragon Grey Ghost and even partially devoured his corpse. This act demonstrated Sunfire's enduring ferocity and strength, even in the face of severe, potentially life-threatening wounds. Around the same time, King Aegon Targaryen had fled to Dragonstone after the fall of King's Landing because he had no other choice. Rhaenyra showed up to the city with the entire Velaryon fleet, an army from the Vale, and 5 massive dragons. When he heard the talk coming from the Nessaria, he decided to verify the facts himself. To his surprise and relief, he found Sunfire lairing within the Dragon Mound, and once they were reunited, both rider and dragon got better with each passing day. Castle Dragonstone was betrayed by Sir Alfred Broom and taken by forces loyal to Aegon and the Greens. Once they were both good enough to fly to the castle, they attempted it, circling the smoking vents of the Dragon Mound in anticipation of a grand entrance. But as soon as they got there, the king and his golden dragon were attacked by the last Black on the island. Baelor Targaryen evaded capture once Sir Alfred's treachery reared its head, and she flew Moondancer to meet Sunfire in the last fight of his life. She used her swiftness against the large and heavily injured dragon to reopen old wounds, create new ones, and even blind his right eye. But in the end, Sunfire the Golden ended things with a mighty slam and a crash, following which he devoured Moondancer's corpse as well. Though he won all 3 of his dragon battles, Sunfire's condition continued to deteriorate, and he was left in the outer yard of Dragonstone to recuperate. The dragon's injuries were severe and infected, and he struggled to heal. Sunfire's final days were marked by pain and suffering. Despite his once magnificent appearance, his injuries left him a shadow of his former self, unable to fight or fly. His last act as a dragon was to devour Rhaenyra Targaryen once she realized that her seat had been stolen, but her blood had to be drawn for him to do that. And after eating her, he stopped eating altogether, and on the 9th day of the last moon, he died because of his infected wounds. Sunfire's life was a testament to the brutal realities of dragon warfare and highlighted their savage and mortal nature. His beauty and strength made him a formidable dragon, but the Civil War reminded us that all such things are transient. From his early days as the mount of Prince Aegon to his tragic end in the yards of Dragonstone, Sunfire's story is intertwined with the rise and fall of his rider, and we don't know about you guys, but we find that fitting. Vermithor. Vermithor, known as the Bronze Fury due to his bronze scales and fiery temper, was one of the largest dragons that the Targaryens ever owned, being rivaled in size only by Balerion and Vagar. Vermithor's egg hatched in the year 34 AC, in the cradle of the newborn Jaehaerys Targaryen, and bonded with him instantly. The first time he loosed his flames on something that wasn't food was to light the funeral pyre of Jaehaerys' father, King Aenys Targaryen. The Bronze Fury grew much faster than anyone could have anticipated, and by 48 AC, he was one of the mightiest dragons of his time. Despite being 14 years old, he was already giving Vagar a run for her money, and he was large enough to be ridden to war by King Jaehaerys, even if it meant facing the Black Dread. Jaehaerys, who ascended the Iron Throne that same year, rode Vermithor everywhere he went throughout his reign, using the dragon to maintain peace and order across the realm like his ancestor Aegon the Conqueror had. When the king was still in his minority, the Lord Protector made a play to snatch the throne away from him. Rhaegar Baratheon had given Jaehaerys shelter when Maegor was hunting him, and married his lady mother in the Golden Wedding, but his ambition became plain as day when he betrothed Alysanne to his brother, Orin. Jaehaerys had only ever had eyes for his sister, so he hatched a plan to marry her in secret. He sent his Kingsguard to Dragonstone under the cover of night, and him and his sister followed on their dragons. Jaehaerys and Alysanne were married on Dragonstone, and Rhaegar Baratheon was so insulted by this that he tried to replace the king with his niece Aerea, going to treasonous lengths to do so. When all his plans failed, he returned to Storm's End awaiting the king's justice, and when it came, Vermithor's true value revealed itself. Jaehaerys forgave Rhaegar Baratheon and brought him back into the fold, but discouraged his ambition by taking him to see Vermithor feeding and menacingly asking him why he'd ever need hostages from the Stormlord. This was the first of many veiled threats that Jaehaerys made in his life, and if you hadn't guessed by now, that threat included him burning people with his Bronze Fury. Once he was coroneted, Jaehaerys set to uniting the Seven Kingdoms from the aftermath of the long years of Maegor's tyranny. He convinced the faith to accept the doctrine of exceptionalism and effectively legalized Targaryen incest, thanks to his skill in diplomacy and the presence of Vermithor. He embarked on 4 royal progresses in the first 5 years of his reign, covering major cities and castles from the Crown Lands, the Vale, the Riverlands, the Westerlands, the Stormlands, and the Reach. Throughout each of these progresses, Vermithor's presence was a crucial symbol of Targaryen strength and stability, but Jaehaerys knew he couldn't repeat his father's mistakes. King Aenys was a weak ruler who, despite being aware of the open dissent against his reign, sent his heirs on a progress without a dragon lest his son appear unmanly. Jaehaerys was determined to take Vermithor with him everywhere, and for the first decade of his reign, the Bronze Fury was often seen flying all over the Seven Kingdoms, projecting the king's power and deterring rebellion. Jaehaerys' wise and just rule, supported by Vermithor's might, brought about a period of peace and prosperity in the realm so unheard of that people started calling Jaehaerys the Conciliator. Somewhere between 58 to 59 AC, he became only the second Targaryen monarch to ever go as far north as Winterfell during a progress. In House of the Dragon, we're told that Aegon Targaryen and Torrhen Stark treated at the Wall, and that Vermithor and Jaehaerys came with Alysanne during their progress to the north. In Fire and Blood, neither of those events go down that way, for Aegon treats with Torrhen at the Trident, and Alysanne is on her way back from the Wall when Jaehaerys finally joins her. She does tell him about the incident, but it doesn't make the king want to investigate the matter personally. Vermithor's first taste of battle came in 61 AC, when he joined Rhaegar Baratheon's war against the Second Vulture King. Jaehaerys took Vermithor into the Red Mountains and burned every crude hideout of the Vulture Kings that he could find. Rhaegar's column cornered his traitor brother Boris, and Jaehaerys slew him personally with the Targaryen's ancestral sword, Blackfire. Once the Vulture King was found and dealt with, Rhaegar returned to Storm's End to live out his final days, and word of Jaehaerys' valor and justice spread throughout the realms. This third Dornish war lasted less than half a year, but marked the first time Vermithor was ridden to war as the official royal mount. The second time was even more impressive, as Vermithor was a key figure in the Fourth Dornish War. Alongside his sons, King Jaehaerys rode Vermithor into battle against the Dornish fleet and annihilated the Dornish forces at Cape Wrath, securing a decisive and casualty-free victory in the course of a day. This battle demonstrated Vermithor's destructive power and made Jaehaerys an even greater rule than Aegon in the eyes of many, for even the conqueror couldn't boast of ending a war in a day. After the Fourth Dornish War, Jaehaerys would only go on 2 more royal progresses, and in the final decade of his rule, Vermithor was practically riderless. After Jaehaerys' death in 103 AC, Vermithor actually became riderless and stayed that way for nearly 3 decades. The dragon resided in the Dragonmont instead of the Dragon Pit, growing nearly as large as Vagar and awaiting a new rider. During this time, the seeds of the Dance of the Dragons were sown, as tensions between the Greens and the Blacks escalated from children's pranks to all-out war. At the height of the Civil War, after both sides had lost sons and dragons, Vermithor was claimed by Hugh Hammer, a blacksmith's bastard who answered the call for dragon seeds. Hugh wasn't a particularly skilled warrior, but he was tall and huge, and so powerful that he could mark Henry's steel bars. He seems to be a bit more sensitive and from King's Landing in the show, but trust us when we tell you, don't let the Family Guy act fool you. He's one crazy dude. Despite his low birth, Hugh's bond with Vermithor made him a significant player in the conflict, and he rode Vermithor into several key battles during the Civil War. One of the first major battles that included the Bronze Fury was the Battle of the Gullet. The Blacks, led by Prince Jaehaerys, sought to retaliate against a surprise attack from the Triarchy's fleet, which was an attempt to break the Velaryon blockade. Vermithor, along with Seasmoke, Silverwing, and Sheepstealer, played a crucial role in the battle, using their dragonfire to decimate the enemy fleet. The Battle of the Gullet was a technical victory for the Blacks, as the blockade continued, but it was an emotional disaster for Jaehaerys, and Vermax died during it, and the Triarchy sacked Spicetown and High Tide. The latter is gonna hit real hard when we see it get adapted, especially now that we know Corlys built it for Rhaenys. The Bronze Fury was next seen in action when Rhaenyra took King's Landing, as Hugh Hammer landed him on the hill of Rhaenys, just outside the Dragon Pit. For their loyal service, Hugh and Ulf White had expected to be made great lords and lavished with lands and wealth. Instead, they were merely knighted and given measly tracts of land on Driftmark. When Daemon proposed giving Ulf and Hugh Storm's End and Casterly Rock once the Lannisters and Baratheons were dealt with, Rhaenyra rejected the proposal rather sharply, and this made them realize they would never climb higher than they had if they stayed with her. So they decided to turn their coats. In 130 AC, Vermithor and Silverwing were dispatched to defend the Black-aligned town of Tumbleton from the approaching Hightower army. The Greens, seeking to capture the town, launched a massive assault from outside its walls and were somehow losing to the Blacks, even though they had the numbers advantage. Yet, despite their efforts, the battle ended in disaster for the Blacks, due to betrayal from within their ranks. Hugh Hammer and Ulf White switched sides, and Vermithor and Silverwing joined Prince Daeron's dragon Tessarion in burning and sacking Tumbleton, leading to the deaths of several key commanders and the capture of the settlement by the Greens. Following the betrayal, Hugh Hammer and Ulf White attempted to secure their positions by claiming their intent to capture the Iron Throne. Hugh, in particular, insisted on becoming king, on account of having the largest and oldest dragon in the world now that Aemond was dead. However, their ambitions were short-lived. Shortly after the First Battle of Tumbleton, the Second Battle of Tumbleton began when Adam of Hull ambushed the Greens with an army of rivermen and Seasmoke. A combination of the factors of the ambush, the forces of the Blacks, and the treachery within the Greens led to utter chaos erupting in Tumbleton once again. Hugh Hammer was killed by his own men, and so was Prince Daeron. However, their dragons were wide awake. Tessarion engaged Seasmoke first, and when the battle was well and truly underway, the Bronze Fury woke up. A score of knights tried assassinating him when he was still half asleep, but after killing them, Vermithor was wide awake and joined the butchery. He must have been barely 20 feet off the ground when sea smoke slammed into him from the skies, knocking him flat on his ass. The two dragons embraced in a deathlock, and the only reason Adam even survived was because he got an unlikely assist from Tessarion. In the struggle that followed, the Blue Queen was the one that somehow emerged victorious. Vermithor had already ravaged Seasmoke's body. He killed the former pride and passion of Laenor Velaryon by locking his jaws around his throat and yanking his head off of his body. But the combined attacks of Seasmoke and Tessarion had left him so injured he couldn't even take wing anymore. Vermithor made one feeble attempt at flying, and then collapsed dead on the ground, with Tessarion having to be put down by Benjicot Blackwood's archers. Vermithor's death marked the end of the era of dragons for the Targaryen dynasty. After the Second Battle of Tumbleton, dragons never danced in the skies of Westeros, and no Targaryen monarch had a fire-breathing mount like their ancestors, especially not one like the tan-winged Bronze Fury. His death, a result of betrayal and the brutal realities of civil war, became a warning on what happens when one lets non-Targaryens get their hands on dragons. Yet, Vermithor's overall legacy is that of a unifier and a stabilizer, for people prefer to remember his days as Jaehaerys' mount and not as Hugh Hammer's. Silverwing. If dragons became tamer in proportion to the amount of time they spend around humans, then it makes sense that Silverwing would be the most docile of all Targaryen dragons, especially because she doesn't even partake in a battle that could get her juices flowing, unless her rider wants her to. Silverwing hatched from the dragon egg that was placed in Queen Alysanne Targaryen's cradle by her elder sister Rhaena. She was known for her beautiful silver scales, which gleamed in the sunlight, making her one of the most visually striking dragons of her time. Alysanne, known for her wisdom and compassion, shared a deep bond with Silverwing, and over the years, the dragon became a symbol of her queenly grace and strength. Throughout Alysanne's life, Silverwing was a constant companion, even more so than her brother and husband Jaehaerys. The dragon accompanied her on her many journeys across the Seven Kingdoms, thanks to the royal progresses that her husband loved so much. For her part, Alysanne would hold courts with the women of every village, town and city that she landed Silverwing on. And over time, her women's courts became a crucial agent of change. The Good Queen introduced a set of laws securing women's rights in medieval Westeros, and Silverwing, being her mount, had a lot to do with the enforcement of those laws without opposition. While Jaehaerys and Alysanne visited all of their kingdoms at least once over during their progresses, their most famous progress was the one to the north, where Silverwing exposed a rather unsettling secret. During her prolonged visit to the most distant polity of her seven kingdoms, Queen Alysanne heard petitions from dozens of lords and held women's courts with hundreds of women, bringing about much-needed modernity to the way of life in Westeros. She managed to charm the ice-cold Alaric Stark, who hated her husband for causing the death of his brother, and she even got him to approach her dragon, although he did so rather warily. What concerned the queen was the fact that Silverwing refused to fly over the wall, a feat that betrayed her otherwise strong bond with Alysanne. Thrice did the Good Queen try crossing the wall, and thrice was she rejected by her mount, which begs the question, why does Silverwing dislike the wall? We suspect we'll find the answer to that from Martin's works anytime soon, because any explanation the TV show gives will not be satisfying. Silverwing was the first and only Targaryen dragon to ever go so far north as the Wall, and HBO just randomly decided that Jaehaerys and Vermithor should join her in that accomplishment, and had Aegon negotiate Torrhen Stark's surrender there as well. There was a brief period of time where Jaehaerys and Alysanne might have had to go to war with Braavos over some stolen dragon eggs, or stop their sister from going to war, for Rhaena's instability only grew with age. But ultimately, Alysanne never flew her dragons a battle, and though Silverwing was nearly 70 years old in the twilight of the Good Queen's life, she never saw a day of action. She did see a lot of flight time, however, as Alysanne loved flying with Rhaena and Rhaenys and rode her until she could no longer. Her last flight caused her to cry because of the emotional and physical pain of the act of separation. After Alysanne's death in 100 AC, Silverwing remained riderless for many years. The next chapter of her life began during the Dance of the Dragons, when she was claimed by Ulf White, a common man-at-arms and one of the dragon seeds who successfully bonded with the dragons during the war. Ulf was also known as Ulf the Sot due to his fondness for drinking and telling tall tales, but due to his bond with Silverwing, he became a significant player in the conflict. In the show, he's Alysanne's grandson, allegedly, so their bonding makes more sense than it does in the books. Silverwing and Ulf participated in several key battles, with their first major engagement being the Battle of the Gullet. Silverwing, along with Seasmoke, Sheepstealer, Vermithor and Vermax, destroyed the fleet of the Triarchy, but lost Prince Jaehaerys and Vermax in the process. The battle was a disaster for the Blacks, who lost many of their ships and most of their resources in the sacks carried out on Driftmark. But Ulf didn't care about that. He might have been a drunk, but he was an ambitious drunk, and he wanted to become a lord for his contribution to the war effort. He was eventually named Lord of Bitterbridge, but knowing he could have had Casterly Rock or Storm's End if Rhaenyra wasn't so smug, Ulf plotted betrayal. Silverwing participated in the first Battle of Tumbleton on the side of the Blacks at Rhaenyra's command. But once the Greens attacked, seeking to capture the town, Ulf and Hugh betrayed their queen. Silverwing, along with Vermithor and Tessarion, made a second Harrenhal of Tumbleton, and the sack that followed was even worse. Following the betrayal, Ulf White became a supporter of Hugh's claim and demanded Highgarden for his own seat. By the time the Second Battle of Tumbleton broke out, the two betrayers were hated by their own allies. Unwind Peak formed the Caltrops, and Prince Daeron gave his blessing for the assassination of both Hugh and Ulf, but due to the sudden nature of Second Tumbleton, only half the job got done. Hugh was killed, but Ulf drunkenly slept through the battle, and when he woke up, he took up his buddy's claim for the Iron Throne. While Vermithor, Seasmoke and Tessarion were killing themselves, Silverwing didn't engage them, but she did take wing and started circling the battlefield for hours. When someone shot a crossbow bolt at her, she flew even higher and only came down once the carnage was over. If this doesn't tell you that she wouldn't hurt her fly unless expressly told to do so, we don't know what will. Silverwing became the large dragon in the possession of any man in Westeros, but things wouldn't stay that way for too long. The Caltrops would finish the job after Second Tumbleton, poisoning Ulf and freeing Silverwing of her bond, but instead of flying to the Dragon Pit or the Dragonmont, she went wild. Maybe it was because she missed her beloved Vermithor. We know next to nothing about dragon mating, but Silverwing and Vermithor were sent to coil with each other often, which we can only interpret as code for dragon sex. When he died, she landed near his corpse and tried to lift his wing 3 times, or so the singers say. Perhaps it was the grief of losing her partner, or the trauma of witnessing 3 of her kind tear each other apart. Whatever it was, once she'd filled up on corpses, Silverwing flew west and made herself a lair on an island in Red Lake, the seat of House Crane and the site where Brandon the Bloody had massacred hundreds of children of the forest millennia ago. She was never claimed by any Targaryen during or after the brief reign of Aegon II, and by the time the last dragon died, she either disappeared or perished as well. The fate of Silverwing is one of the biggest mysteries we're hoping Martin's follow-up novel Blood and Fire answers. But for now, her legacy remains one of unity and non-aggression. The 2 times Silverwing fought in a battle was at the behest of her besotted second rider. Otherwise, she's remembered by most as being the beloved mount of good Queen Alysanne and a reminder of the unbelievably stable reign of King Jaehaerys I. Dreamfire. If a single name could explain to you all the powers of the mystical Targaryens, then it would be the name belonging to Helaena Targaryen's dragon. Dreamfire hatched during the second half of Aegon I's reign, bonding with his 9-year-old granddaughter Rhaena in 32 AC while still a hatchling. She was known for her beautiful blue and silver scales and her slender, graceful appearance. Before claiming a dragon, Rhaena was a shy girl that had no companions, hid behind her parents at events, and spent most of her time with animals rather than humans. This sounds exactly like Helaena from House of the Dragon, so it's possible that Rhaena Targaryen was a dreamer as well. That would explain why she named her hatchling Dreamfire, for Targaryen magic was rooted in blood, fire, and prophecy. Once she bonded with her dragon, Rhaena became known for her adventurous spirit and strong will, and in later years she'd come to see herself as a second Visenya Targaryen. She shared a deep bond with Dreamfire and could be found flying her when she wasn't occupied with something else. Throughout Rhaena's early life, Dreamfire was a constant companion. The dragon accompanied her on many journeys across the 7 kingdoms, but it was the journey she was denied that would end up wounding her rider. After getting married to her younger brother Aegon, Rhaena and her husband were sent on a royal progress by their father, with the hope that seeing the couple would quell the rebellious attitudes of the faith. However, Aenys forbade Rhaena to take Dreamfire with her, because Aegon didn't have a dragon and he didn't want his heir to look weak. This was a terrible move on Aenys' part, because the royal couple ended up being besieged by thousands of poor fellows at Crackhall. This could have been avoided had Rhaena been allowed to bring Dreamfire with her, for the dragon was young but large enough to deter rebellion. But alas, war was not written in the fate of this particular dragon. Rhaena and Dreamfire would remain separated from each other for 2 years, and they'd finally be reunited when she and Aegon snuck into King's Landing in the absence of their uncle Maegor. Though Dreamfire was smaller than Aegon's Quicksilver, together the dragons could have made a ton of difference in any battle. Quicksilver was already a quarter of Balerion size. If Dreamfire's presence put them at even half of Balerion size, the siblings could have pulled off a Cyrax versus Vagar. Heck, they could have distracted Maegor with one dragon as the other took out the rider, but for some reason, Aegon didn't take Rhaena to war with him. He died during the battle beneath the God's Eye, and Rhaena mentally prepared herself for the worst. She sent her daughters Arya and Rhaela off to safety under disguises and flew to Fair Isle to await Maegor's next move. When she was summoned to King's Landing 4 years later to marry her uncle, Rhaena obeyed, knowing it would be the best move for her daughters. She remained in the capital as one of Maegor's Black Brides for a year, before escaping with Blackfire and Dreamfire one night as the king slept, having heard of her only surviving brother Jaehaerys' claim. Dreamfire, Silverwing, and Vermithor arrived at King's Landing together once word of Maegor's death spread throughout the realm, and this was one of 3 times Dreamfire was involved in an offensive, or a potential one, anyway. The second time was when she learnt that her lover, Alyssa Farman, had stolen dragon eggs lain by Dreamfire and fled Dragonstone. Oh right, we forgot to mention, Dreamfire is also the first known Targaryen dragon to have laid eggs. If the conspiracies are true, then Daenerys' dragons are born from her eggs, but right now, it's their theft that concerns us. When Jaehaerys learns of Alyssa's actions from Rhaena, he tells his sister they might have to go to war with their dragons if those eggs hatched, and she backs him up, though she never has to go to war because those eggs are never heard of again. The final time is when she learns that her mother's second husband got her pregnant despite being warned otherwise, and that she died birthing her second Baratheon. Rhaena flew Dreamfire to Storm's End and threatened Rhaegar to never marry again, lest she makes a second Harrenhal of his seat. Rhaegar laughed it off at the time, but he never took another wife, and Dreamfire never made that fateful flight. Apart from these 3 instances, Dreamfire travelled most of Westeros looking for Rhaena's daughter Arya when she disappeared, and once Arya was gone, Rhaena was settled in Harrenhal, where she spent the rest of her days. After Rhaena's death in 73 AC, Dreamfire returned to the Dragon Pit and remained riderless for nearly half a century. Her life's next significant chapter began when she was claimed by Prince Helaena Targaryen, the daughter of King Viserys Targaryen and Queen Alicent Hightower. Helaena, known for her gentle nature and prophetic dreams, shared a strong bond with Dreamfire, much like Rhaena, and like Rhaena, she too never flew her to war. But unlike the Queen in the East and the West, we don't know if that was by choice. In Fire and Blood, Helaena is, for the lack of a better word, normal. She isn't so deeply entrenched in her prophetic dreams that she can't function like a powerful noblewoman, and before Aemon claimed Vagar, Dreamfire was the largest and oldest dragon that the Greens had. Where things went wrong for her was with the death of Jaehaerys, because in the books, that drives Helaena insane, but in the show, her emotions have been handled more gracefully. Her insanity prevents her from being a capable dragon rider, and so Dreamfire pretty much becomes a harmless resident of the Dragon Pit for most of the Civil War. The only time she ever fights is for her life. Sad as that sounds, because Dreamfire was involved in one of the most tragic events of the dance, the storming of the Dragon Pit. While the shepherd and his mob brought down Cyrax and killed her in the streets of King's Landing, another group of bloodlusted mobsters broke into the Dragon Pit. They killed most of the dragons inside the domed structure, except for Dreamfire. She broke free of her bonds and burnt scores, before trying to break free of the Dragon Pit and causing it to collapse instead. Her actions brought an end to the horrific slaughter that was the storming, but it was also the only time Dreamfire ever fought. Her existence was more focused on the oracular aspects of Targaryen magic, and that was cemented by the fact that she let out a blood-curdling scream in the Dragon Pit seconds after Helaena died in the Red Keep. Dreamfire's life was marked by her close bonds with Rhaena and Helaena, and her role in the Dance of the Dragons was more tragic than minimal. From her early days as a symbol of Rhaena's status to her participation in key events during the Civil War, Dreamfire was a powerful and majestic dragon. Her death during the storming of the Dragon Pit revealed the brutality of men, and showed the world that even dragons weren't safe from them if enough gathered in a crowd. Tessarion. Now let's talk about Tessarion, Daeron Targaryen's fiery sidekick, a dragon with a flair for the dramatic and flames as blue as the summer sky. Tessarion, aka the Blue Queen, hatched in 120 AC and quickly became one of the sprightliest dragons in the Dance of the Dragons. Daeron, the fourth and often forgotten child of Alicent Hightower, was chilling in Old Town away from his royal siblings' drama, but don't be fooled by his low-key upbringing. When Daeron hit 15, he hopped on Tessarion and joined the dragon party. Tessarion isn't just any dragon. She's the youngest fighting dragon on Team Green and about 1/3 the size of the behemoth Vermithor. What she lacks in size, she makes up for in agility, zipping through battles with a speed that left older dragons like Vagar eating at dust. Daeron and Tessarion's first star moment came at the Battle of the Honeywine. Lord Ormond Hightower's forces were getting clobbered until Daeron and Tessarion swooped in like fiery avengers, saving the day in the nick of time. Talk about making an entrance. Post King's Landing fall, Daeron and Tessarion continued their dynamic duo act, keeping Rhaenyra's supporters on their toes. Their big scene was at the First Battle of Tumbleton. Things looked grim for Team Green until two of Rhaenyra's Dragonseed, Hugh Hammer and Ulf White, pulled a plot twist and switched sides, handing Daeron and Tessarion the win. But like any epic tale, The high didn't last. Daeron met his end in the Second Battle of Tumbleton under mysterious circumstances. Tessarion, loyal as ever, went berserk, facing off against Adam Velarion's Seasmoke in an epic dragon dance-off. Vermithor even crashed the party. Seasmoke and Vermithor bit the dust, and Tessarion, badly injured, had to be mercifully put down by a Blackwood archer. Talk about a tragic finale. Seasmoke. Seasmoke is the swift and sleek dragon of House Targaryen, known for his pale silvery grey scales and light green eyes. Originally ridden by Laenor Velaryon and later by his half-brother Adam of Hull, Seasmoke is a nimble flyer, even in his youth. During the War for the Stepstones, Laenor rode Seasmoke into battle, playing a crucial role in the Siege of Bloodstone. Seasmoke saved Daemon Targaryen after he was wounded and surrounded by Triarchy soldiers. This dynamic duo also made a grand entrance at King's Landing for Laenor's wedding to Rhaenyra, with his mother, Rhaenys, riding her dragon Melly alongside him. After Laenor faked his death and went into exile, Seasmoke remained riderless on Driftmark, where he continued to reside. In House of the Dragon Season 2, Adam of Hull noticed Seasmoke roaming Driftmark and nearly devouring Rhaenyra when she tried to claim him. Adam observed Seasmoke foraging for crabs along the shores, and even Rhaenyra and Mysaria witnessed the dragon flying around Dragonstone, restless for unknown reasons. Seasmoke's restlessness peaked when he was drawn to the Dragonstone gantry by the dragon song Horos Bartosi. Sir Steffon Darklyn attempted to claim Seasmoke, but the dragon rejected him fiercely, burning Steffon and the Dragon Keeper before flying back to Driftmark. Seasmoke then pursued and cornered Adam against a rock in the forest, ultimately choosing him as his new rider. In the books Fire and Blood, Seasmoke was named by Laenor Velaryon and was grey and white in colour. Though of fighting size during the Dance of the Dragons, Seasmoke was still young and more agile in the air compared to his older counterparts. He was similar in size to Tessarion, about 3 times smaller than the massive Vermithor, but not as fearsome. Seasmoke's story is filled with thrilling moments and fierce loyalty, from rescuing Daemon to finding his new rider in Adam. This nimble dragon might not be the biggest or the most fearsome, but his agility and striking appearance made him a standout in the Targaryen saga.
Vamos!
Vermax, the dragon with olive green scales and pale orange wings, has a bit of a grumpy streak when it comes to cold weather. Vermax is the loyal steed of Prince Jacaerys Velaryon, making his debut in House of the Dragon. Rumour had it that Jacaerys was a bastard, not fathered by Sir Laenor Velaryon, but by Sir Harwin Strong. Queen Alicent Hightower and her followers loved to spread this gossip. Skeptics doubted the dragon eggs given to Jacaerys and his brothers would hatch, but they were quickly proven wrong. Vermax hatched and bonded with Jacaerys, solidifying his place in dragon history. By the time the Dance of the Dragons kicked off, Vermax was ready for action. Jacaerys rode him north to rally support for his mother, Queen Rhaenyra Targaryen. They visited Jane Arryn of the Eyrie, Desmond Manderley of White Harbour, and Cregan Stark of Winterfell. Despite Vermax's dislike for the cold, they secured crucial alliances for Rhaenyra. According to Mushroom, Vermax laid eggs in Winterfell's crypts, a claim dismissed as fanciful by Archmaester Gildane, who argues that dragon sex identification is tricky, and Bath's theory of dragons changing sex is downright ludicrous. Vermax saw battle during the Battle of the Gullet. He attacked the Triarchy's fleet but flew too low, possibly injured or caught by a grapple, and crashed into a burning ship. Jacaerys tried to escape but was killed by crossbow bolts, sinking into the sea alongside his loyal dragon. In House of the Dragon Season 1, young Jacaerys trains Vermax in the Dragon Pit, with other Targaryen boys watching. After Rhaenyra's coronation, Jacaerys and Vermax embark on a diplomatic mission to the Eyrie and Winterfell. In Season 2, Vermax is seen near the Trident while Jacaerys negotiates with House Frey for safe passage for House Stark. In Fire and Blood, Vermax is described as the Mount of Jacaerys Velaryon, thriving and growing larger every year. His olive green scales and orange frills make him a standout among the dragons, despite his ill-tempered reaction to the cold. Cyrax. Meet Cyrax, the young dragon with a flair for adventure and a serious dislike for bad weather. Cyrax, with his white scales, purple wing membranes, orange eyes, and orange frills, is the loyal mount of Lucerys Velaryon, hatched in 118 AC. The same year as his rider, Cyrax quickly bonded with Lucerys, making their mark in the Targaryen saga. When Prince Jacaerys, Lucerys, and their brother Joffrey were born, there were rumors that they were actually fathered by Sir Harwin Strong, not Sir Laenor Velaryon. Queen Alicent Hightower and her followers spread this gossip far and wide. Skeptics doubted the dragon eggs given to the boys would hatch, but they were quickly proven wrong. Cyrax hatched and bonded with Lucerys, while his brothers had their own dragons, Vermax and Tyraxes. By the time the Dance of the Dragons began, Cyrax was ready for action. Lucerys rode him to Storm's End to deliver a message to Lord Boros Baratheon, seeking his support for Queen Rhaenyra Targaryen. They arrived amidst a brewing storm, only to find Aemon Targaryen and his massive dragon Vagar already there. Aemon, still holding a grudge over losing an eye to Lucerys years earlier, demanded retribution. Boros Baratheon, not wanting bloodshed under his roof, allowed Lucerys to leave, but Aemon pursued him. As the storm raged, Cyrax struggled against the wind and rain, trying to outmaneuver Vagar, who was 5 times his size and a veteran of countless battles. The two dragons clashed above Shipbreaker Bay, the sky lit up with blasts of flame and the deafening roar of dragons. Despite his agility, Cyrax couldn't match Vagar's sheer power. In a fierce battle, Vagar overpowered Cyrax, and the young dragon fell, broken, into the stormy waters below. Lucerys was never seen again, with some saying he was swallowed whole by Vagar. In House of the Dragon Season 1, Cyrax and Lucerys are seen flying to Storm's End. The young prince tries to calm his dragon in the storm, but their encounter with Vagar leads to a tragic end. In Season 2, Rhaenyra finds one of Cyrax's wings washed ashore, a grim reminder of the battle. Though young and swift, Cyrax couldn't escape the fate that awaited him in the storm. Tyraxes. Tyraxes is the dragon with a fierce heart and a fiery spirit. Bonded to Joffrey Velaryon, Cyrax is one of the 3 dragons hatched for Princess Rhaenyra Targaryen's sons. Alongside his dragon siblings Vermax and Cyrax, Tyraxes plays a crucial role in the Targaryen saga. Rumors flew about Rhaenyra's sons being bastards, supposedly fathered by Ser Harwin Strong. To quash the gossip, King Viserys I declared that each boy would get a dragon egg in their cradle. Skeptics doubted the eggs would hatch, but Tyraxes, Vermax and Cyrax proved them wrong. Tyraxes hatched and bonded with Joffrey, solidifying their place in Targaryen history. Tyraxes was growing larger every year, though slightly smaller than Vermax and Cyrax. By the start of the Dance of the Dragons, Tyraxes could fly long distances with Joffrey, but wasn't ready for combat. Joffrey, eager to join the battle, begged his mother to let him ride Tyraxes to war. She refused, wanting to keep him safe. In Season 2, Tyraxes is transported by dragon keepers as Joffrey prepares to leave for the Eyrie to secure an alliance with House Arryn. Lady Jane Arryn isn't impressed, claiming the dragons are too small. Despite his mother's initial refusals, Joffrey took Tyraxes to the Vale of Arryn, flying from Dragonstone to Gulltown, then to the Eyrie. After Rhaenyra seized King's Landing from the Greens, she called Joffrey back to the capital with Tyraxes. Tyraxes made his lair in the Dragon Pit, where he found safety during the riots. In the chaos of the King's Landing riots, would-be Dragon Slayer stormed the Dragon Pit. Tyraxes defended himself fiercely, incinerating many with his fire. In the confusion, he accidentally strangled himself with his own chains. After his death, the rioters cut off his wing membranes to make dragon skin cloaks. Morgul. Morgul is a young dragon with a fiery spirit and a tragic fate. Bound to Prince Jaehaera Targaryen but never ridden, Morgul's story is one of chaos and courage during the infamous Dance of the Dragons. During the tumultuous Dance of the Dragons, Rhaenyra Targaryen and her faction, the Blacks, seized King's Landing from Aegon II Targaryen and his Greens. Princess Jaehaera, Morgul's owner, was successfully whisked away from the capital amidst the chaos. Meanwhile, Morgul remained in the Dragon Pit, alongside other dragons like Dreamfire, Tyraxes, Shrykos, and Seasmoke. While Rhaenyra ruled King's Landing, relations with the citizens deteriorated rapidly, leading to unrest and eventual riots. During one of these riots, a one-handed prophet named the Shepherd riled up the mob against the dragons. He convinced the angry crowd to storm the dragon pit and slay the mighty beasts inside. Morgul, despite being shackled by heavy chains, fought fiercely, unleashing torrents of fire and slaying scores of rioters. However, his valiant efforts were in vain. A massive man in heavy armor, known as the Burning Knight, is credited with ending Morgul's life. This knight thrust his spear through Morgul's eye, even as the dragon bathed him in fire. Morgul died, never having been ridden, in a blaze of defiance and fury. The name Morgul means death in High Valyrian, a fitting moniker for a dragon whose life was steeped in the violence of war. It's also a nod to Morgul, a term for dark sorcery in J.R.R. Tolkien's Legendarium. Though Morgul's life was short, his fierce spirit and tragic end left a mark on the history of House Targaryen. Shrykos. Next, we have Shrykos, the young she-dragon bound to Prince Jaehaera Targaryen during the Dance of the Dragons. This fierce dragon played a dramatic role in one of the most chaotic events in Targaryen history. During the Dance of the Dragons, tensions in King's Landing reached a boiling point. The city was ripe with unrest, and a one-handed prophet named the Shepherd stirred the pot further by ranting against all dragons. He incited a mob to storm the Dragon Pit, where Shrykos was housed. Shrykos, shackled by heavy chains, found herself at the center of the storm when the crazed mob invaded the Dragon Pit. Despite her restraints, she fought fiercely, killing scores of rioters. However, her fate was sealed when a woodsman named Hob the Hewer leapt onto her neck. With his legs locked around her neck, Hob struck Shrykos with his axe 7 times, calling out the names of the 7 with each blow. The final blow, dedicated to the stranger, crashed through her scales and bones, piercing her brain and killing her. In the books, specifically Fire and Blood, Shrykos is detailed as a young dragon bound to Prince Jaehaerys Targaryen, the son of King Aegon II Targaryen. Though depicted in histories and lore and the Dance of Dragons, dragon egg incubators seen beneath Jaehaerys and Jaehaerys' beds in A Son for a Son indicate that Shrykos and Morgul hadn't yet hatched within the timeline of House of the Dragon. Shrykos' life was brief and filled with turmoil. She was never ridden, but left a mark through her fierce battle in the Dragon Pit. Her tragic end came not from a grand battle in the skies, but from the brutal chaos within the city walls. A statement to the violent and unpredictable nature of the Dance of the Dragons. Shrykos' story is a poignant chapter in the Targaryen legacy, highlighting the dangers and brutality faced by dragons during one of Westeros' most turbulent periods. Her fierce spirit and tragic end are remembered as a significant part of the Dance of the Dragons. Moondancer. Meet Moondancer, the swift and nimble she-dragon bonded to Lady Baela Targaryen. With her pale green scales, pearl-white horns, and pearlescent frills, Moondancer is a standout among House Targaryen dragons. Moondancer bonded with Baela from a young age. She has striking pale green scales, dark tiger-like stripes, cream-colored eyes and horns, and pearlescent frills on her head and tail. While she was young and slender, Moondancer was incredibly fast and nimble, a stark contrast to the larger, less maneuverable dragons like Vagar and Cyraxes. In Season 2 of House of the Dragon, we see Baela and Moondancer patrolling the skies above the Crownlands. During one of their flights, they spot Sir Criston Cole and Sir Gawain Hightower with a retinue of mounted knights. Baela commands Moondancer to pursue them, but they're forced to withdraw when the knights take cover in a dense forest. In Fire and Blood, Moondancer is described as a pale green dragon with pearl-white highlights on her horns and crest. Although young, she's known for her incredible speed and agility. Moondancer's size and swiftness made her an excellent scout and a fierce competitor in aerial battles. During the Dance of the Dragons, Moondancer and Baela remained at Dragonstone. When Aegon II Targaryen and his forces took Dragonstone, Baela escaped her chambers, reached Moondancer, and prepared her for battle. As Aegon flew Sunfire over Dragonmont, Baela and Moondancer rose to meet them. The two dragons engaged in a fierce aerial battle. Despite Moondancer's agility, she was eventually blinded by Sunfire's flames. She continued to fight valiantly, wounding Sunfire severely before both dragons crashed to the ground. On the ground, Moondancer's speed couldn't match Sunfire's size and strength. The younger dragon was eventually killed by Sunfire, who then devoured her carcass. However, Moondancer managed to inflict mortal wounds on Sunfire, who died later from the injuries sustained during their battle. Despite her youth, she left a lasting legacy in the Targaryen saga. Her bond with Baela and her valiant efforts in battle highlight the courage and strength of both dragon and rider. Stormcloud. In Fire and Blood, Stormcloud is described as one of the youngest dragons, too small to ride when the dance began. He bonded with Aegon the Younger and accompanied him when he was sent away from Dragonstone. Despite his young age and small size, Stormcloud played a crucial role in Aegon's escape during the Civil War. A dragon egg was placed in Aegon's cradle at birth, which hatched into Stormcloud. By the start of the Dance of the Dragons, 9-year-old Aegon hadn't yet ridden his young dragon. During the Civil War, Prince Jaehaerys Velaryon decided that his half-brothers, Aegon and Viserys Targaryen, should be sent to Pentos for safety. In late 129 AC, the young princes boarded the Pentoshi cog Gay Abandon at Dragonstone. Aegon took Stormcloud, and Viserys took his dragon egg. In the Gullet, their ship and its escorts were attacked by warships of the Three Daughters. Aegon made his first flight on Stormcloud to escape. Prince Aegon managed to reach Dragonstone, clinging to Stormcloud's neck. Stormcloud was severely wounded during the escape, with countless arrows in his belly and a scorpion bolt through his neck. He died within the hour, with hot blood gushing from his wounds. After Stormcloud's death, Aegon never flew again. In Season 2 of House of the Dragon, Stormcloud is seen being transported inside a kennel by dragon keepers as Aegon prepares to leave for the Eyrie to secure Rhaenyra's alliance with House Arryn. Lady Jane Arryn isn't impressed, claiming the dragons are too small. Stormcloud is also shown sitting next to Aegon while he and Viserys play with their toys. Stormcloud's story is one of bravery and tragic sacrifice. Despite his youth and inexperience, he managed to save his rider in a desperate situation. His death had a profound impact on Aegon, who never flew again after losing his loyal dragon. Stormcloud's brief but significant presence in the Dance of the Dragons highlights the intense and often tragic bond between dragon and rider. Morning. Meet Morning, the pale pink she-dragon with black horns and a crest, bonded to Lady Rhaena Targaryen, the daughter of Prince Daemon Targaryen and Lady Laena Velaryon. Morning hatched during the Dance of the Dragons from one of the 3 eggs Rhaena brought to the Vale, a clutch produced by Rhaenyra's dragon, Cyrax. Her birth in 131 AC alarmed the Greens, as they'd lost all their dragons during the war, and Morning's existence strengthened the Blacks' legitimacy. Morning was one of the 4 dragons to survive the Dance of the Dragons, and the only one still controlled by the Targaryens. Rhaena and Morning arrived in King's King's Landing after King Aegon II's death in 131 AC. While the small folk were ecstatic at the sight of Morning, King Aegon III, who feared dragons, commanded his guards to remove her from his sight. Despite this, Rhaena often took Morning around the city, the young dragon coiled about her shoulders like a stole. By 134 AC, Morning had grown significantly and made her lair in the dragon pit. On the third day of the third month of 135 AC, Rhaena rode Morning for the first time, circling the city before returning to the dragon pit. They continued their flights daily, each time venturing further. Morning's only visit to the Red Keep delighted Queen Daenerys Velaryon, but King Aegon III refused to see the dragon. Rhaena soon moved to Dragonstone, where she felt Morning would be more welcome. When Rhaena's husband, Sir Corwin Corbury, was killed in the Vale, her sister Baela travelled to Dragonstone to ensure Rhaena wouldn't use Morning to seek revenge. In 136 AC, as preparations were made for a royal progress for King Aegon III's 16th birthday, Rhaena wished to accompany the progress on Morning. The hand of the king and the Council of Regents delicately deflected her suggestion. Morning's story is one of survival and loyalty as a dragon who lived through the Dance of the Dragons and continued to serve her rider. The Cannibal. The Cannibal was a wild dragon that roamed Dragonstone during the Dance of the Dragons. He was black as coal, with menacing green eyes, and was the largest and oldest of the 3 wild dragons on the island, the other 2 being Sheepstealer and Grey Ghost. The small folk named him the Cannibal because he feasted on dead dragons, newborn dragons, and dragon eggs. The Cannibal's exact age is unknown, but he was older and larger than Sheepstealer, who hatched during the early reign of Jaehaerys I Targaryen. Some claimed the Cannibal lived on Dragonstone before the Targaryens arrived in 114 BC, which would make him older than Vagar, though Grand Maester Munkin and Septon Eustace doubted this. The Cannibal was notorious for attacking smaller dragons and led on the eastern side of the Dragonmont. Would-be dragon tamers tried to ride him a dozen times, but his lair was littered with their bones. When Prince Jaehaerys Velaryon called for dragon riders in 129 AC, none dared to approach the Cannibal due to his fearsome reputation. Those who did never returned. In one incident, the Cannibal devoured Sylvie Dennis and his sons after Dennis lost his arm trying to tame Sheepstealer. In 130 AC, the carcass of Grey Ghost was found burned and broken at the Dragonmont's base. Sir Robert Quince blamed the Cannibal, though it was actually Sunfire. Fearing for their safety, fisherfolk urged Sir Robert to kill the Cannibal, but he refused and forbade fishing in the eastern waters. Lady Baela Targaryen wanted to investigate, believing her dragon Moondancer could outfly the Cannibal, but Sir Robert confined her to her chambers. The Cannibal was one of the 4 dragons to survive the Dance of the Dragons. In 132 AC, during the burial at sea of Lord Corlys Velaryon, it was rumoured that the Cannibal took wing to salute the deceased, though Archmaester Gildane suggested he was more likely to eat the corpse than salute it. After the dance, the Cannibal vanished, leaving behind a legacy of fear and mystery on Dragonstone. Grey Ghost. In Fire and Blood, Grey Ghost is described as a solitary dragon, residing high on the Dragonmont and hunting for fish in the narrow sea. His reclusive nature meant he never accepted a rider, remaining one of the mysterious wild dragons of Dragonstone. Named for his ability to blend into clouds and mist, Grey Ghost was one of the 3 wild dragons living on the island during the Dance of the Dragons. Unlike his fiercer counterparts, Sheepstealer and the Cannibal, Grey Ghost was notably elusive, avoiding humans and their activities for years at a time. Grey Ghost preferred to feed on fish, often seen flying low over the narrow sea to snatch his prey. His lair was a smoking vent high on the eastern side of the Dragonmont. Despite his elusive nature, Grey Ghost was a known figure among the small folk, who had given him his ghostly name. He was never claimed or ridden by any man. During the Dance of the Dragons, Prince Jaehaerys Velaryon sought new dragon riders to bolster the fight against the Greens. Some dragon seeds tried to find Grey Ghost, but he remained hidden. Alyn of Hull, one of the dragon seeds, initially sought Grey Ghost before unsuccessfully attempting to claim Sheepstealer. In 130 AC, the crew of the Nessaria witnessed a fierce aerial battle between Grey Ghost and another dragon above the Dragonmont. Grey Ghost was slain in this struggle. When Sir Robert Quince heard of Grey Ghost's death, he mistakenly attributed it to the Cannibal. In reality, Grey Ghost was killed and partially devoured by Sunfire upon his return to Dragonstone. As we just mentioned, Grey Ghost's age is unknown, but it's reasonable to assume he was a young dragon during the Dance of the Dragons. This assumption is based on 2 factors. The Cannibal, known to kill young dragons, was initially thought to have been responsible for Grey Ghost's death. Sunfire, referred to as a splendid beast, though young, ultimately killed him. Sheepstealer. Sheepstealer was a wild male dragon with a taste for mutton, earning his name from the small folk of Dragonstone. He lived at the back of Dragonmont and hunted between Driftmark and Wendwater. At the start of the Dance of the Dragons, he was one of 3 wild dragons on Dragonstone. Sheepstealer was a mud-brown dragon, not aggressive towards humans unless provoked, but he could be vicious and ill-tempered. While he devoured the occasional sheepdog, he never harmed a shepherd. Grandmaester Munkin described him and his rider Nettles as a skinny brown girl on a skinny brown dragon, though Munkin never actually saw Nettles. Sheepstealer's egg hatched when old King Jaehaerys I Targaryen was still young. He made his lair in the caverns of Dragonmont and hunted sheep as far as Driftmark and the Wendwater. He spent over 7 decades living wild on Dragonstone, becoming increasingly difficult to claim. During the Dance of the Dragons, Prince Jaehaerys Velaryon called for dragon seeds to claim dragons. Sheepstealer killed more candidates than any other dragon during this event, known as the Sowing. A bastard girl named Nettles eventually tamed Sheepstealer by leaving a freshly killed sheep for him every morning. This method accustomed the dragon to her presence, allowing her to mount him. Nettles and Sheepstealer took part in the Battle of the Gullet and the capture of King's Landing, after which Sheepstealer made his lair in the Dragon Pit. Nettles and Sheepstealer joined Prince Daemon Targaryen and his dragon Cyrax in hunting Aemon Targaryen and Vagar along the Trident. They remained at Maidenpool, continuing their search every morning. When Queen Rhaenyra named Nettles a traitor, she left Maidenpool with Sheepstealer, feeding him the largest black ram present at the castle. They were last seen flying over the Bay of Crabs. After Rhaenyra's death, Sheepstealer was reported to have been seen at Cracklaw Point in the Mountains of the Moon. In 134 AC, Sir Robert Rowan's royal army encountered Sheepstealer and Nettles in a cave in the Vale of Arryn. 16 men were slain, and many more wounded in the ensuing fight. Nettles and her dragon were last seen flying deeper into the Mountains of the Moon. Sheepstealer's story is one of wild independence and fierce loyalty to his rider, Nettles, highlighting the untamed nature of the dragons of Westeros. Drogon. Drogon, one of the 3 dragons born in the wastelands beyond Lazar, is distinguished by his black and red scales and red-black wings. He was named after Daenerys Targaryen's late husband, Khal Drogo. Drogon first appeared when Daenerys hatched him from an egg placed on Khal Drogo's funeral pyre, signaling the return of dragons to the world. As Daenerys travels, Drogon grows rapidly and becomes increasingly fierce. In Qarth, she teaches him to breathe fire, which he uses to burn the warlock Pyat Pree alive, freeing Daenerys and his brothers from captivity. Drogon continues to grow and is about the size of a small dog by the time Daenerys and her party reach Astapor. In Slaver's Bay, Drogon plays a crucial role in Daenerys' conquest. During a negotiation for the Unsullied, Drogon burns Krasny's Monaklos at Daenerys' command, leading to the fall of Astapor. As Drogon continues to grow, he becomes a significant presence in Daenerys' campaign. In Meereen, he kills goats and a young girl, leading Daenerys to confine Viserion and Rhaegal to the catacombs, while Drogon remains free. He later returns to save Daenerys from the Sons of the Harpy in the fighting pits of Meereen, allowing her to escape on his back. Drogon's role becomes even more prominent as Daenerys moves to conquer Westeros. Upon Jon Snow's arrival at Dragonstone, Drogon and his brothers fly overhead, startling him and Davos Seaworth. Drogon quickly warms up to Jon, allowing him to pet him, which surprises Daenerys. Drogon and Daenerys engage in the Battle of the Gold Road, where Drogon burns the Lannister forces and destroys Qyburn's Scorpion. During the Battle of Winterfell, Drogon, Rhaegal, and Jon Snow fight fiercely against the Night King and his undead dragon Viserion. Drogon aids Daenerys in engaging the Night King and Viserion, managing to knock the Night King off his mount. However, Drogon is swarmed by wights, forcing him to take flight and shake them off, leaving Daenerys and Ser Jorah Mormont to face the undead alone. After the battle, Drogon returns to comfort Daenerys as she mourns Jorah's death. Drogon and Rhaegal fly to Dragonstone, but Rhaegal is killed by Aeron Greyjoy's scorpion bolts. Enraged, Drogon helps Daenerys burn Aeron's fleet and participates in the destruction of King's Landing, using his fire to annihilate the Iron Fleet, the city gates, and much of the city itself. Following the destruction, Drogon witnesses Daenerys' death at the hands of Jon Snow. In a moment of grief and rage, Drogon melts the Iron Throne with his fire before flying away with Daenerys' body across the narrow sea. The last sighting of Drogon is him heading east towards Volantis, leaving his ultimate fate a mystery. Rhaegal. Rhaegal, named after Daenerys Targaryen's late brother, Prince Rhaegar Targaryen, was one of the 3 dragons born on the Dothraki Sea. Alongside Drogon and Viserion, Rhaegal hatched from a deep green egg with burnished bronze flecks. Rhaegal was distinguished by his jade green scales, bronze eyes, black claws, and teeth like black needles. His dragon flame was a fiery mix of yellow, red, and green, making him quite the spectacle in the sky. Throughout his life, Rhaegal was a loyal companion to Daenerys, but his journey was filled with significant events, battles, and ultimately a tragic end. In Meereen, after Drogon killed a young girl, Daenerys decided to confine Rhaegal and Viserion in the catacombs for safety. They grew larger and more aggressive in captivity. Tyrion Lannister eventually freed them, recognizing their need for freedom and their essential role in Daenerys' campaign. When Daenerys returned to Meereen to face the Slavers' fleet, Rhaegal and Viserion broke free and joined Drogon in burning the enemy ships, decisively ending the siege. Rhaegal then accompanied Daenerys and her army on their voyage to reclaim the Iron Throne in Westeros. On arrival in Westeros, Rhaegal and his siblings flew ahead of Daenerys, investigating the island of Dragonstone. Later, when Jon Snow arrived, Rhaegal and Drogon flew overhead, startling him. Daenerys later invited Jon to ride Rhaegal, a significant moment marking Jon's growing connection with the dragons. During the Battle of Winterfell, Rhaegal played a crucial role. Jon Snow, mounted on Rhaegal, provided air support against the Night King's forces. Rhaegal engaged in a fierce aerial battle with Viserion, who had been turned into an undead dragon by the Night King. Rhaegal sustained serious injuries during the fight, including deep wounds on his belly and tears in his wings. He crashed into the snow, throwing Jon off in the process. Despite his injuries, Rhaegal managed to survive the battle and began to recover. In the aftermath of the battle, Daenerys and Jon found Rhaegal resting and recovering from his wounds. Despite the damage to his wings, Rhaegal took to the air again, albeit not as gracefully as before. However, Rhaegal's journey came to a tragic end off the coast of Dragonstone. While flying near the fleet, he was suddenly struck by a colossal scorpion bolt fired by Euron Greyjoy's fleet. The first bolt hit Rhaegal in the chest, followed by another to his wing. The fatal blow came when a third bolt pierced his neck, causing massive blood loss. Fatally wounded, Rhaegal plummeted from the sky into the sea below, sinking and marking the end of his life. Jon Snow's bond with Rhaegal was significant, showcasing the dragon's loyalty and Jon's Targaryen heritage. Viserion. Viserion, one of Daenerys Targaryen's 3 dragons, was a magnificent creature with cream and gold scales and red-orange wings. Named after her elder brother Viserys, he was born from an egg placed on Khal Drogo's funeral pyre, hatching alongside his brothers Drogon and Rhaegal. Viserion's journey through the Game of Thrones series is marked by several iconic moments, leading to his tragic demise and resurrection. As Daenerys and her dragons travel to Qarth, Viserion is stolen by Xaro, Zo, and Daxos. Daenerys finds Viserion and his brothers chained in the House of the Undying. When Pyat Pree attempts to imprison her with magic, Daenerys commands her dragons to breathe fire, and together they burn Pyat Pree alive, breaking his spell. Throughout Daenerys' journey from Astapor to Yunkai, Viserion accompanies her, showing his growing strength. In Meereen, however, Drogon kills a young girl, prompting Daenerys to chain Viserion and Rhaegal in the catacombs to prevent further incidents. This captivity makes them larger and more aggressive. In Meereen, Tyrion Lannister frees Viserion and Rhaegal from their chains, believing they'll be better off. Later, Viserion and Rhaegal break free and join Drogon in destroying the fleet besieging Meereen, marking the end of the slavers' attempt to retake the city. Viserion then accompanies Daenerys and her army on their voyage to retake Westeros. Viserion's most dramatic moment comes during the White Hunt beyond the Wall. As Daenerys, Drogon, and Rhaegal attempt to rescue Jon Snow and his expedition from the White Walkers, the Night King hurls an ice spear, fatally wounding Viserion. The dragon crashes into the frozen lake and sinks into the water, marking a devastating loss for Daenerys. The Night King resurrects Viserion as an ice dragon, his eyes now glowing blue. With Viserion as his mount, the Night King leads his army to Eastwatch by the Sea, where Viserion's blue fire destroys a portion of the wall, allowing the army of the dead to invade Westeros. During the Battle of Winterfell, the Night King rides Viserion, wreaking havoc with his blue flames. Jon Snow and Daenerys, riding Rhaegal and Drogon, engage in a fierce aerial battle with the undead dragon. Rhaegal manages to severely wound Viserion, tearing off part of his jaw and neck. Despite his injuries, Viserion continues to fight, causing chaos in Winterfell's courtyard. Just as Viserion prepares to kill Jon, Arya Stark kills the Night King, severing the magic that animated the dragon, causing Viserion to drop dead instantly. Viserion's death, along with the losses of Jorah, Rhaegal, and Missandei, drives Daenerys to give in to her grief and rage, leading her to burn King's Landing. Quicksilver. Quicksilver was a magnificent she-dragon, bonded first with King Aenys I Targaryen and later with his son, Prince Aegon Targaryen. Named for her likely silver scales and known for her pale white fireballs, Quicksilver was about a quarter the size of the massive Balerion. Quicksilver's story begins when she bonded with the infant Aenys Targaryen in 7 AC. Aenys had been sickly from birth, but after bonding with Quicksilver, his health improved dramatically, silencing rumors about his paternity. As Aenys grew, he and Quicksilver thrived together, with the dragon becoming his beloved mount despite his love for horses. In 23 AC, Aenys rode Quicksilver to Sunspear in Dorne to celebrate the peace between Dorne and the Iron Throne. He later flew to Dragonstone for his father Aegon I Targaryen's funeral in 37 AC. Quicksilver was a loyal companion to Aenys throughout his reign until his death in 42 AC, after which he lit his funeral pyre alongside Silverwing and Vermithor. After Aenys' death, his half-brother Maegor I Targaryen usurped the throne, leaving Prince Aegon Targaryen to claim Quicksilver in a bid to reclaim his rightful place. In 43 AC, Aegon and his wife, Rhaena, sneaked into King's Landing to claim their dragons. Aegon finally mounted Quicksilver, and they flew out of the city together. Aegon and Quicksilver then led a rebellion to retake the throne. Gathering an army of 15,000 men, Aegon and Quicksilver marched towards King's Landing. However, they were intercepted by King Maegor and Balerion. In a dramatic aerial battle above the God's Eye, Quicksilver, with her pale white fireballs, was no match for Balerion's black flame. Balerion overpowered Quicksilver, ripping her wing off and sending her and Prince Aegon plummeting to their deaths. Cyrax. Cyrax is a she-dragon bonded to Rhaegor waters. Born in 98 AC, Cyrax was given to Rhaegor by his father, King Valon I Targaryen, on his 10th name day. Many saw her as the reincarnation of Balerion the Black Dread because of her dark scales, wings, and fire, but Rhaegor named her Cyrax after a legendary dragon from Sothorios. Rhaegor, being a Targaryen bastard, had fewer formal duties, allowing him to spend more time with Cyrax. Unlike other dragons confined to the dragon pit, Cyrax and Rhaegor spent days exploring together, strengthening their bond. This constant companionship contributed to Cyrax's rapid growth. Rumors even suggested Rhaegor used sorcery and blood magic to enhance her growth. By the age of 18, Cyrax had become a fearsome young dragon. Her wingspan was larger than an elephant, and her jaws could swallow several sheep whole. Her terrifying presence and the deep bond with Rhaegor made them an inseparable pair, capturing the awe and fear of those who witnessed them. Cyrax's journey was one of growth and legend, tied closely to Rhaegor's fate and his connection to the mystical aspects of House Targaryen. This bond and the rumors of sorcery surrounding her growth added an air of mystery and power to her story, solidifying Cyrax's place as a significant dragon in the Targaryen lineage. The Last Dragon. The last dragon of House Targaryen was a sad little creature who died young in 153 AC during King Aegon III Targaryen's reign, earning him the nickname Dragonbane. This green female dragon lived in King's Landing and was small and stunted with withered wings. Her name is lost to history, but she managed to lay a clutch of 5 eggs, which unfortunately never hatched. In 152 AC, a young boy named Sir Arlan of Pennytree saw the dragon and her eggs, describing them as hard as stone, but beautiful. Just a year later, the last dragon died, sparking rumors that King Aegon III, who feared dragons after witnessing his uncle's dragon devour his mother, had poisoned her. The dragon's death marked the extinction of dragons in Westeros for over a century. 19 dragon skulls hung in the throne room during the last years of the Targaryen dynasty, with 2 small and misshapen ones likely belonging to the last hatchlings from Dragonstone. The death of the last dragon had a significant impact on the world. It's said that magic began to fade from the world on that day. Sir Arlan of Pennytree believed that summers became shorter and winters grew longer and harsher after the dragon's demise. When she died, it seemed like dragons were gone for good in Westeros and everywhere else. But then, a century and a half later, Daenerys Targaryen came along and managed to hatch not 1, not 2, but 3 new dragons, bringing them back from extinction. Cyrax. Cyrax was a legendary dragon from the time of the First Men. The story goes that Cerwyn of the Mirror Shield managed to kill Cyrax in a rather clever way. Cerwyn, armed with a shield polished to a mirror-like finish, sneaked up on the dragon. When Cyrax saw his own reflection, he was momentarily confused, thinking it was another dragon. Taking advantage of this distraction, Cerwyn plunged a spear through Cyrax's eye, killing the dragon. In more recent times, the tale of Cerwyn and Cyrax came up in A Dance with Dragons. Haldan, trying to gauge Tyrion Lannister's knowledge, asked him how Cerwyn of the Mirror Shield slew Cyrax. Tyrion correctly answered, explaining the trick with the Mirror Shield and the spear to the eye. Haldan wasn't particularly impressed, remarking that even Rolly Duckfield knew that bit of trivia. The legend of Cyrax is one of many that highlight the age-old conflict between humans and dragons in Westeros. Cerwyn's tale, in particular, is often used to illustrate themes of cleverness and bravery in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds. The Mirror Shield tactic has become a famous part of Westerosi lore, demonstrating that wit can sometimes triumph over brute strength. Though Cyrax's story is steeped in myth, it serves as a reminder of the dangers and the allure of dragons in the world of Westeros. Whether or not the tale is entirely true, it's become an enduring part of the culture and history, passed down through generations as a symbol of heroic ingenuity. Marvelous verdict, and there you have it. The legendary lineup of dragons from Fire and Blood, from Balerion the Dread to the more nimble Quicksilver. These majestic beasts have left their fiery marks on the history of Westeros. These dragons sure have their own tales of glory, tragedy, or sometimes sheer chaos. Whether it's the daring exploits of dragon riders or the epic battles fought in the skies, the dragons of Fire and Blood prove that there's never a dull moment in the world of Westeros. So, next time you hear the roar of a dragon, even if it is just in your imagination, you'll know the rich stories behind these awe-inspiring creatures. Keep those shields polished and spears ready, because with dragons around, you never know what adventure awaits. Thanks for joining me on this epic adventure through the world of blood and fire. Until next time, stay fire-tastic.